Welcome! The Fantasmagorium show is proud to present the 5th installment of Idols, Snakes, and Skulls. You're joined tonight by Ernesto Martinez. Hello, Ernesto.
Hello.
The one and only king of the goof people, Tom Jr. Jackson. How's it going?
I'm doing well.
And Scott got sucked into another dimension, and Steve is still lost in the museum. But yes, tonight we are doing combination non-spoiler and spoiler review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And don't worry, we'll be very clear when we move into spoiler territory. So without further ado, Tom, what are your non-spoiler thoughts about this film?
My non-spoiler thoughts about this film. This was, I'd have to say, a love letter to Indiana Jones. It's a love letter to the franchise. I had fun with this one. That's what I can say without spoiling it and giving away things. So there's
Ernesto?
He's hitting back the joint there.
Really goes down smooth. Well, I hate to be the wet blanket here, but I thought it was okay. Closing on meh, but it's okay. Not the finish I wanted, but it's finished, and we'll get into it soon.
I'm kind of in the middle. I kind of gave it like a B because, yeah, I do feel that times is too much CGI. It's too long. Not necessarily in any one scenes. It's just like in several of them while I'm watching it, it feels like this needs to be streamlined a bit more in the pace. Like it felt like it took quite a long time to get through the first act. I mean, not the prologue. The prologue aside, which I thought was magnificent. The first act after that I thought took kind of a while, and I don't think the movie really embraced the themes that they discussed in the premise 7 months ago, which sounded a lot more interesting. And we've seen characters like, they had two other Harrison Ford characters. Han Solo ends up a broken guy who's kind of broken relationships, having to rebuild his life, whatever. Rick Deckard having, broken man, has to rebuild his life in Blade Runner, whatever. Luke Skywalker and, in Last Jedi, and then, Logan in another James Mangold film, broken person trying to rebuild. And John Wick is a little bit of an exception because he already starts out as a broken guy who's got to, come back into the action. But I feel they keep going back to this trope in movies in general, but with this one, there didn't seem to be any reason to do it. It's just, okay, we're just going to continue what we did, especially with Lucasfilm, doing this with one of their Harrison Ford characters again, which I thought would have been great if they tied it into the themes of the official premise, which was Indy having a problem with Operation Paperclip and the villain using his position in NASA to try and do whatever it is he's going to do, neither of which has any bearing on the story. So from that perspective, I thought it was a little bit grating that they're just doing that, broken man thing again. It's like you could have old Indy, have him be, enjoying his life somewhat and have him still get wrapped up in the adventure. Because he does kind of come back into it almost pretty seamlessly. He doesn't want to go on this adventure, but when he needs to be Indiana Jones, he steps up to the plate to be Indiana Jones. Action scenes, some of them went on a little too long, but I liked the lore that they were going with and the fact that they kind of made a point that, they're not trying to do too much pseudo-history here because unlike Crystal Skull, where they're doing the whole Chariots of the Gods things, which has been, thoroughly debunked even before that movie came out. This is trying to get back to something which could potentially, what they're doing obviously with the MacGuffin, as we'll get into later, isn't exactly real, but at least they're basing it on something more solid and actually ancient and something that's extant in our world rather than something they just made up entirely. Mads Mikkelsen, there's a couple scenes, I really like him in the prologue I like him in another scene in particular early on in the first act. But the rest of the movie, I feel he's kind of. It's like they cast Mad Mikkelsen and they figured that would take care of it, but he doesn't stand out as much. I remember when they first showed his costumes that I don't know if you guys remember, but they put out that publicity photo where he's wearing like the same outfit as Major Tote from Raiders. And I thought, oh, cool, we're gonna see a really sadistic, see like the Major Tote character in the main role. And I didn't really feel that. I thought he stood out a lot more in the prologue when he was sort of painted as a more interesting scientist who had ideas rather than where it goes later in the movie. That being said, I still tabled expectations because I'm realistic about the fact that they're making this movie 41 years after they filmed Raiders. It's just like you're either on board with Old Man Indy or you're not. And I was on board insofar as I can accept him being kind of in a backseat driver through most of it. But I was waiting for him to kind of get in the driver's seat, so to speak. And there seemed to be opportunities for that in the climax, and it didn't really happen, which I thought was a bit disappointing. And again, the pacing is a bit inconsistent. They try and do, an homage to a short round with a new character in here, which doesn't really make an impression at all. It's like, I thought it would have been great if they actually brought back short round and have, maybe the Imperial Japanese as the villains, because though some of them were pardoned through Operation Paperclip as well. But that's another story. But here it's just kind of, okay, we're kind of doing this again. I actually like the Helena character a lot. She reminded me a lot of Belloc because she's just in it for fortune and glory and money and, the auction scene and all that stuff. I love that kind of stuff and that banter. I thought that was really fun. But overall, it is definitely too long. I still had fun with it. And I was totally on board with what's going to undoubtedly be a very divisive climax. I was totally there for it, particularly because it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. I thought it was going to get even more ridiculous, and I'll get to that in the spoiler section. But I kind of like where it was going. But the way they try and tie the themes up at the end, again, doesn't really work because they didn't really push the themes that they were advertising in the trailers and the marketing from the start. But yeah, it's kind of... It surpassed my expectations in terms of how good that opening sequence was, and that it wasn't just him being supplanted by Helena the entire time. It's like, okay, it's not going to be one of those types of movies. I still felt that it was
way worse.
Oh, really?
Oh, we'll get to why. I mean, it might not be as bad as people were making out to be. Seen the movie. Jesus fucking Christ! Can't wait to get to that part.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have a problem with it. I was just, again, annoyed that the Teddy character seemed kind of there. It's like, you could cut him out of it and save some screen time. The same thing with the Antonio Banderas character. And he said in his defense that it's just a glorified cameo. And it's like, yeah, kind of. And so I still, I had fun with it. I gave it, I would give it I kind of gave it like a B or something like that. But, yeah, so non-spoiler thoughts. That's pretty much where I'm at. Too much CGI, too long, some issues, but I still had fun with it. Anybody else have non-spoiler stuff to say?
So for me, non-spoiler, and we'll probably, it's been mentioned to death, so I'll probably throw in a little bit more into it. I like the idea of the cold open, the prologue. Indiana going on a classic adventure. He's knee-deep in the middle of it, kind of like a reference to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull when they mentioned that he was working for the government during World War II in Berlin, and that's pretty much where he is, unless I'm mistaken. And he gets caught, and he's trying to escape. And yeah, they de-aged him as we've seen in the trailer. And don't get me wrong, when he's not moving, it looks great. But then when he starts moving, it's not a question of noticeable. It's a question of believing that this is a younger or Indiana Jones from the original trilogy doing the adventures like he used to, because they're doing the de-aging effect, and it just comes across as it's not real. It's very fabricated. It doesn't really work. But I like the whole concept of what they're trying to look for, the item they're looking for, what happens with the item, who the characters are being introduced. It's the end of it's the end of World War II. The Nazis are on the verge of losing because of X, Y, and Z reason, which if you read your history book, you know what's going to happen next. And the whole idea of the movie, it's the late 60s. We're going to go into the 70s. the space race, or the end of the space race in a way, where Indiana Jones is now at the end of his life. A lot of stuff has happened in the last 12, 13 years since the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and we'll get into that later. And we see where he is in life, and I don't know, I didn't like it too much. I know what they were going for. It's just like, of all the characters, really, are we gonna go with this trope with him? And I don't mind the trope. Don't get me wrong. I think if you write a good script and you have great characters, you can get away with any trope and reuse it as much as you can, as long as you know what concept they're using for. Here, I don't know. It didn't work with Indy, and not gonna lie, it was pretty boring in some states. I just wanted some scenes to end, like just end. Let's go to the next one because this is not working. This is not exciting. I like that they actually didn't cop out in the third act, because if
Yeah,
you
I
see
went
the
there.
last, if you see the last four movies, they always capitalize and they always deliver what they're promising. So I like that they promised what they were doing here. I like that it was because there is a moment where you kind of already know what's going to happen. You just want to see if they actually go for it, and once they go for it, for the most part, it's okay, and we'll probably get into it in spoilers.
All right, and joining us, Daniel's Hot Topics says, let's see what's he say here coming up on the screen. This Dial of Destiny was so great. The critics are out of their minds trashing this movie. This movie makes me want more Indiana Jones. Okay, yeah, I'm glad you liked it that much. Again, I'm kind of in the middle. Ernesto's like, and Tom, I think, is going to like it a lot more than, or probably like it the most. And then Daniel follows up saying, no spoilers, but there was a scene in the end of the movie, like the very end, that makes you feel there could be one more adventure for Indy in the future. Yeah, they did say that they wanted to give Indy, more or less. It's not a spoiler to say happy ending, because obviously that's kind of the vibe they've been going for with these movies. So,
Ending.
yeah. So, without further ado, I thought we'd have more non-spoiler thoughts, but that's pretty much where we're at. So, spoilers, entering spoiler territory.
You know what? You should put up a banner saying that we're doing spoilers, so if someone comes in, we don't have to keep repeating, this is spoilers.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have that banner. Otherwise, I would totally do it. But all right, so this movie begins.
If we're going to spoil, let me kind of like break the ice here
Okay.
and travel back to September 10, 2022, when me and Kat were discussing what this movie was going to be like. And I kept saying, it'd be great if they brought back Nazis into the game, with whatever legion is left from the Reich, trying to salvage their resources and use one of Hitler's old archives and find a new super weapon that involves the master race. And Kat's like, meh, I disagree. They've done Nazis twice now, and I don't want them to read the same plot a third time. But it's fun when he punches Nazis, Kat. There's so many other interesting groups and villains that Indy could encounter. Well, Nazis and Russians are popular again to hate as villains. And there won't be any Asian countries to avoid pointless controversies and hashtags. Again, I was on the mark.
No, I still think the Japanese would have been better. In particular, when they mentioned Operation Paperclip, I'm thinking I would do a fictional version of Yoshiro Ishii, the head of Unit 731, the bacteriological unit, who was fanatical and still wanted to go in major attacks against the biological attacks against the U.S. at the end of the war. He was pardoned, brought to the U.S., worked alongside other pardoned Nazi doctors at Fort Detrick in Maryland, and he ended up going back to Japan early, but that fort kept doing bioweapons research with other former Nazis and such until 1969, which I thought was prudent because that's the same year this film takes place in, and I think what a great way you could reintroduce Short Round, because Indy mentions in Temple of Doom that Short Round's parents were killed in the Japanese bombing of Shanghai in 1932. And I thought, wow, you could tie the villain into that, and have his evil plot be, now that I've been working for the U.S. at their chemical weapons facility for the last 24 years, I'm going to go back in time to 1931, and instead of spending all the resources allocated to me through the unit researching bioweapons, I'm going to bring all this stuff with me and mass produce them to win the war. And that would be, I thought, really awesome, because it would mean that you could bring Short Round back, because again, the Chinese obviously still have a history of not being happy with the way things have been, Japan not really owning up to everything. And if you put a personal angle in there with Short Round and his parents, being killed by this guy, I'm like, that'd be awesome. Plus you get the chance for Indy to beat both the bad guys in World War II. And I thought that would just be really fun.
Yeah, but that would take us a clever, creative team to work on this, and clearly they weren't there.
And it's like, it would be great because that would be the perfect reason to bring back Short Round, especially since Ki Kwan is making such a big comeback right now. But I digress. Time to get into what the movie actually is about. Daniel's Hot Topic says, I love the beginning of the movie set in the 40s and World War II, and everyone loves that scene at least. I was hoping they would stay in that era a bit longer. Yeah, so the movie begins with Indy and an British archaeologist Basil Shaw as they're attempting to sneak aboard the fabled Nazi gold train to steal the Spear of Destiny, otherwise known as the Lance of Longinus, which, according to biblical legend, was wielded by a Roman soldier who was tasked with stabbing Jesus to see if he was dead or not while he was on the cross. And that's when the blood was spilled and caught by the Holy Grail, which was mentioned in The Last Crusade. And Indy and the villain Voller both independently find out that this is a fake because it's made of alloy and not bronze. But Voller, I love that you can notice that the other Nazis are kind of, I mean, they're not mocking him, but they're kind of pushing him around like they don't really care about this expert here. Like, get out of the way, you don't matter. And there's that great joke where he says, where the Nazi colonel played by Thomas Kretschmann is like, oh yeah, Voller, we'll take this fake spear or whatever you call it we'll take this to the Fuhrer. Tell him the truth that it's fake, but don't worry, we got half this other thing that might help us save our asses down the line. And I thought that was really funny. But I especially loved how Voller did not hesitate to insult the Fuhrer in several different ways to a Nazi colonel aboard the train, which even though other Nazis and high-ranking ones privately felt this, they would never say it out loud. And so to me, I mean, a lot of people were saying Voller's plan isn't revealed till late in the game, but I thought I pretty much got the idea of what he's all about in that, like, he thinks clearly that Hitler's a nutcase and that there are better ways to win. I just didn't know how he would actually, make that work. But that whole sequence, yeah, I agree the de-aging is kind of hit or miss, but I was in because I was just loving. It's like a vintage Indiana Jones adventure. It's like we've seen what he does to Nazis in pre-war. What's he going to do to him in the heart of the battle in the war? And I thought that was a really thrilling, fast-paced, exciting sequence. Really out there type of stuff that I wouldn't. And the fact that the Nazi Gold Train was actually the focus of the script that was written by John Kasdan, or being written by him several years ago for the version that was supposed to come out in 2019 that eventually got scrapped. So I like that they actually repurposed that for the prologue rather than, just like some other things. What did you guys think of this sequence? I thought it was really great.
The sequence was great. They would have just brought in Gruber to just play young Harrison Ford and use deep fake or whatever digital or physical makeup to make him look more like Harrison Ford, and you'd save yourself a buck and it wouldn't look as distracting. But for the most part, it's like, yeah, that's vintage Indiana Jones. It just didn't feel very real, unfortunately.
Daniel follows up saying, whoa. Short Round's family was killed in the bombing of Shanghai. Yes, in your favorite Indiana Jones movie, Daniel, The Temple of Doom, when they're camping out on their journey to Pankot Palace and Indy is sitting around the campfire with Willie, and she asks, where did you find Short Round? And he says, well, I caught him picking my pocket, and I've kind of been looking after him ever since. And he says that Shorty's parents were killed in the bombing of Shanghai in 1932, which was perpetrated by the Japanese, and that was a whole other thing, a whole incident that went on for months. But yes, that was it. That was mentioned in that.
So that must be your favorite movie, Daniel. What happened?
Yeah.
Well, now that you say that he would have been great for him to be in this movie, which a lot of people agree, but I guess nobody thought about that because, let's face it, nobody was thinking about Ke Huy Quan before Everything Everywhere All at Once. So I don't exactly put the blame on the studio for that one. But you can easily see, instead of it being Antonio Banderas in a quick rewrite, that would have been Ke Huy Quan or Short Round in the trailer going, Andy! Instead of Antonio Banderas.
Daniel says, yeah, there was going to be an Indiana Jones movie about the Spear of Destiny, the spear that pierced the side of Christ at the crucifixion. They already did that in Legends of Tomorrow Season 2. They also already did that in one of the Indiana Jones books that was put out, Indiana Jones and the Spear of Destiny.
And they did that in the Librarians as well.
And they did a version of that. They did a version of it in Justice League Unlimited where Gorilla Grodd got a spear, which was kind of like a homage to the Spear of Destiny.
Yeah, and by revealing that the spear in this movie was a fake, that actually keeps consistency with the book, The Spear of Destiny, which I thought was kind of cool, because that one does deal with the the real one. So that was kind of cool. Daniel also follows up with he says, yeah, they were going to do an Indiana Jones movie about the Nazi gold train, and I was told about that. Yeah, the one that was going to be by John Kasdan. And I always thought that was a fun legend, even though it was never, there's no evidence whatsoever for its existence, but it just seems like a really neat idea that they just, all the missing artwork was piled aboard this train and hidden in a mine shaft and just caved in so nobody could have it, because the Nazis would be that, that dickish to do that. Daniel says, I just bought Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom at Walmart on Canada Day. It was an HD version. The movie is spectacular. Rip Mullerarm's actor. He died 2005, Amish Puri. Yeah, he was great, though. And let's see. So I just really thought that whole sequence in the beginning was really zippy, really fun. Classic indie action, but it's sort of to the film's detriment, and to me, that it's like the best scene in the movie. It's like... it's definitely, for me, the most exciting opening sequence. Not the best. I said the best is still the opening scene of Raiders, because that's just classic, great introduction for Indiana Jones. But I think that's one of the best action scenes in the whole franchise.
I don't think anything tops Raiders opening. I don't think anything's going to top the Raiders opening.
Oh, it won't. Not at all. But
that's when you really want to introduce a character, that movie did it, and did it very well.
Right. So I just really like the idea that they were setting up the villain as somebody, yes, he knows Hitler's a moron, but he also seems not just intelligent when it came to historical artifacts, but he's a scientist. And I thought maybe there's going to be a new angle on this, and I just kind of thought that sort of falls by the wayside after that. But I like Thomas Kretschmann as the colonel. He was cool. Like when he tells,
sorry, go ahead.
When he tells Indy, when he's capturing him, and he's like, "You're gonna take all the shit." He's like, "Yeah, to the victor go the spoils." And then Indy throws that back in his face when he kicks him off the train.
Yeah. I'll say this about that train sequence. I did like when, because a lot of people are saying, "Man, a lot of huge body count for Indiana Jones." I'm like, I don't think Indiana Jones had nothing to do with the body count in this opening sequence. That was lucky happenstance, especially with the anti-aircraft gun that was just mowing all of them down. It's like, damn, that's a lot of Nazis getting grated into cheese. But I do have a complaint here, and I know in movies you're supposed to suspend some disbelief when some people get injured, when they get hit,
Daniel brings that up too.
They get shot and everything. And then you get Dr. Voller. He's trying to get the half of the dial back, and when Toby Jones tells him to duck, everybody ducks, and Voller just gets a clean, hard. You can hear that crunch sound to the face. It made me think of Dennis Hopper in Speed. And then when he's back in 1960, I'm just like, how the fuck did you survive that?
Yeah, Daniel says the same thing. He says, Catherine, did you think Voller died on the train when he was hit by the sign at full train speed? Anyone else would have been dead, but I guess he has plot armor. My first thought was that when he showed back up in 1969 uninjured, was that maybe the dial or somebody else messed with it or did something. Because the movie is called The Dial of Destiny, and maybe there's something going on there. But no, it was just a ridiculous amount of plot armor, kind of like when Indy's dangling from the noose and that bomb blows up just one level below him. And, he's fine. But what did you think, Tom? Do you think that Voller was like dead as a doornail when that happened?
Yeah, I thought so, but I thought, that's just a glorified cameo then. And the way he was talking about being in the movie, he wasn't explaining it like it was a glorified cameo. So I had a feeling he'd been in it for a bit longer. That opening scene, I had no problem with the de-aging with that. It literally felt like you just came in on one of Spielberg's Indiana Jones films. Like you're right in the middle of it, but this time it went even further back. You know what I mean? Like right when it's that the war is just about to end. I liked the him running through the train, and he gets into the train, and he sees the two Nazi officers, and he's pretending he is one, and just pours out the drink. Like, what are you doing? And that's like classic Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones right there. It's sort of reminiscent of the Zeppelin when he's like no ticket, almost that kind of humor for that. What's his name? The guy who played his friend, Toby
Jones.
Basil.
Toby Jones.
Basil.
I liked his character. I would have liked to have seen more of him, and I would have liked to have seen more of him going crazy from being obsessed with this dial, being obsessed with it.
And yeah, that's another trope that they put in these movies of people being obsessed with things. And I didn't really get why he's letting Indy take it away. He's like, take it and destroy it, and he lies and says he'll do it. But of course, Indy can't bring himself to destroy it.
He goes, promise me you'll destroy it. I promise I'll destroy it. I'll destroy it. And he gives it to him because Indy promised him that he would do that. And I kind of like how that flashback works in a way when he keeps bringing it up like, don't you remember the last time I was at your house? Don't you remember? And then it goes back to that flashback. So in some sort of ways, she does remember, but doesn't want to bring it up, which I have to say, there was a little bit of a problem with this movie I had. It wasn't a problem. It was a plot point.
Oh, just admit it was a problem. We're not
gonna. No, I'm gonna tell you what it is. It's, they're talking about, at one point they're on the boat and they're talking about, well, what would you do if you could go back in time? And Indy talks about, telling what not to go to war, not to die, because how much it would, not only hurt him but hurt the mother, hurt the relationship. But you never hear of what her reason for wanting that dial and what would she do if she could go back. And I was always expecting her to say, I would go back and show this to my father. Look, I've got this to work. I've got this. And that's what I was thinking, that she was going to say that the whole time. Like, I'm going to show this to my father. I want to show him that this works. I want to show him that his work was not for nothing. That's what I thought. And it kept going through my head during the movie that was going to be the reason why. But what I really liked about her character was, you didn't know, was she playing Indy? Was she not playing? Was she in it? Was she not in it? Was she a friendly? Was she not a friendly?
Oh, you are giving
that was done so well to where you didn't know what was what with her. And I think that's a good way of making you guess. Is she a villain? Is she playing the villain? Is she playing Indy? Is she in it for herself? What's going on here? And I kind of like that.
I found that to be more of an inconsistency, because it's clear in the beginning she just wants to sell this thing for the money. And we find out that when she goes to the auction, she had already made arrangements to sell it to Voller, but didn't tell him about the auction because she wanted to jack up the price because she knew he was going to pay whatever he had to get it. So you're right. When Indy says later in the movie, nobody memorizes 7 or 8 notebooks about something that they just want to sell. So the notion that she's so obsessed with selling it, but has taken all this time to learn everything about it, to me seemed a bit more of an inconsistency, because nothing really happens between her attempt to sell it being sabotaged and him bringing that up to suddenly change her mind completely about it. It's like, it's not until they see the inscription on the tomb, which shows the bird with the propeller, and the fact that Archimedes is wearing the wristwatch, that she kind of has that epiphany that, oh my God, this thing might be real.
Right. So she might have been thinking the whole time, I'm getting this, I'm going to sell this. It's a fake. It's a fake. It's not real. I don't believe it. But then seeing that watch and the tomb may have, set that clock. Actually, that scene there was one of my favorites. Not her finding the watch. Was them going through the caves. Because Indy brings up the Temple of Doom. And
yes.
Did you drink the blood of Kali? And did you mess with voodoo? And stuff like. I'm like, oh, okay. I this is a love, and that's when I realized this is a love letter to Indiana Jones, because they're bringing up his past events that he has been through. They're bringing up Temple of Doom, which I think it wasn't an in-your-face way, but it was in a way of saying, I've seen things. Have you done this? Have you seen this? I've seen. Yeah,
because she was dogging him for his ability, him wheezing, climbing up the thing. He's like, "Well, have you been tortured with voodoo or drank the blood of Kali?"
Yeah, and I actually that whole scene kind of just like with Last Crusade. That scene made me want to go walking through a cave and look for all those hidden things. It kind of really made me want to go and do something like that. It was a fun little scene.
After.
David O'Neill says, but she needed to come to that. She hasn't seen the Grail and the Cup and their power. True, but like Indy says, it's not like she read all of those books between the auction and seeing the sarcophagus. Like, she did that in advance. So to Tom's point, she should have Indy should have asked her, what would you do? I think the reason he doesn't ask her where would you go with the dial is because he seems to think that she's just, like she says, I just want money. There's no greater power in this world than money, she says at one point. So it's like, well, she kind of sees it, but she kind of wants to, the Ark. Okay, yeah, he says the.
Yeah, but you know what? It works on the same level as the Ark as well. That reference, what you were saying, David, it still works for the dial.
Right, she is an archaeology student.
Yeah,
because she is an archaeology student and knows her stuff. So Ernesto, tell us all of your thoughts about that character. Don't hold back.
I'm not gonna hold back. You bet your ass on this. She was an insufferable asshole throughout this whole movie. God damn. Like, it made me miss all our past female characters that I gave shit from. You know what? I miss Willie. Get her back over here. I want to hear her scream and bitch about not being in Shanghai anymore. I miss that. I would take that over this any day. But no, there was nothing redeemable about this character. Even when they tried to redeem her near the end, it's like, what is it about you that I need to care about? Oh, you memorized all your father's notebooks, so I should give a shit? No, I don't give a shit. From the first moment she's there, you're thinking, okay, she's interested. She's going to put a firecracker up Indiana Jones' ass, get his pep in his step back because he's older now. He's sad. And it wasn't until later that we find out why he's sad. But at this point, he's already retiring. He just wants to get on and live the rest of his day, living in his apartment with his rude neighbors and knocking on their door every day because they're playing music at 8 in the morning. Which, by the way, if you play your music at 8 in the morning, fuck you. But anyway, going back to the movie, yeah, when she starts, it's like, okay, I see where this is going. You see her in the classroom. She's answering all the questions that none of the students want. And, you see Indy kind of like getting the light back into it when she's answering all those questions that none of the students want to do. And I'm like, okay, I see where this is going. And then the moment the henchmen walk in, it's a complete 180. She leaves them there pretty much left for dead. She doesn't give a shit what happens to him, knowing that they're going to kill them. She's like, well, sorry, Indy, you're going to die here, but I'm not going to die. I got debts to pay. And everything with her is not, I don't like her. I never liked her at all.
Especially in the tuk-tuk chase, where the part where they get cornered by the cops, and she says something, and he's trying to tell them to go after the other guy, and she's like, actually, I just told them to shoot you. And I was like, there's no reason for you to do that at this instant.
No. And there's nothing about, okay, I know they haven't seen each other since she was 12, but she's just treating him like absolute garbage. She just like, oh, I don't give a shit what happens to you. I'm in it for myself, which I get that there are characters that are in it for themselves, but there are better written characters who are in it for themselves, and then they come around and you still like them despite their flaws. Here, there's nothing to like about her flaws. The only thing that we're supposed to like about her is that her father was obsessed to the point of dying obsessed, and owing to the point that Indy had to come in there and steal half of the dial from him, which, by the way, I know that obsession is the main theme in all these movies, but there is no reason why half of that dial should have driven him that crazy.
Yeah, I agree. Especially after he's had it for so many years. Because that scene was supposed to take place in 1951, so he's had it for 7 years by that point. But
Yeah.
also,
Other
I
than
like the idea that
yeah.
they were trying to. I like the idea that they were trying to draw a parallel with Indy and his father, where he goes to see them, and he can see that he's too obsessed in his work and not being a father, whereas Indy's father was obsessed with the Grail, not being a father to him, and so he's like, I can't let him do this, and he probably feels partly responsible because he gave him the dial at the end of that, when opening salvo when he acquired it, and like when she said, like when he asked her, why are you going obsessed with going after the thing that drove your father crazy, and she's like, well, wouldn't you? And I love that callback, and I wish they kind of pushed that further as being the nature of the relationship. Like she's trying to. It's like I get why she's a bit of a Belloc type person because her father didn't really raise her, and Indy wasn't much of a godfather. I mean, he hadn't seen her and didn't even bother looking her up for 18 years. And so it's like, yeah, I can't fault her for wanting to be a Belloc type, but there's no reason
Yeah,
for her
but
to
we
be
like Bella.
right.
But we like
There's no
Bella.
reason for her to keep trying to kill him at every turn that they come into in this movie. So I thought it would have been nicer if they pushed the idea that it's like not only he's like I failed as a godfather. He feels maybe push that he feels responsible for this because he's the one who gave Basil the dial in the first place, and maybe they have that try and foster the relationship and him try and because he never really brings her around. It's like she kind of just comes around automatically during the climax rather than because of anything Indy ever says or does in the movie. I mean, she does kind of pause and listen briefly when he tells her that he would want to go back to save his son, and she's like, well, he enlisted to please you. He's like, no, he did it to piss me off. And you can tell she kind of is a little touched by that when he tells that story. But then, what is it? The very next day, when Indy tells her, "Oh, that guy was my friend. He was just murdered," and she's like, when she just goes back to doing whatever the next clue.
There was no charm. There was nothing about her that I liked. No charm. Even when there's a moment of brilliance when she's decoding the tablet for Dr. Volger, and you're thinking, okay, you're thinking, oh, she's really selling him out. She's really showing just how shitty she is. And when she pulls out the stick of dynamite, okay, then it's the monologue is part of the distraction, which I liked. Admit it, don't get me wrong, and I did like that. But if I don't know, it just didn't feel earned. It didn't feel earned, especially when they're down in the depths looking for the other half, and she just leaves him there, practically just staring at him while he's almost drowning. And she's coming in for the save. I'm like, why didn't you just pull him out? You didn't have to go all the way up there, then just come back down. Sorry, there is nothing about her that I liked in this movie.
David follows up saying, see, that's why the obsession didn't bother me. It was Indy Senior's obsession. It was setting up more commonalities, more setting her up as a parallel to Indy. Yeah, I agree with that, but the difference is that Indy didn't become really an unbearable asshole when his father wasn't there for him. And even though she is an asshole, she's coming around for different reasons. Like, you could tell that when Indy first calls Voller a Nazi at the auction, when he's like, are you still a Nazi? And she kind of has this weird reaction. Like, she clearly didn't know that. And so I feel it's not until they get to the boat when she sees that Voller has killed these people and kills Ronaldo, and that's when she realizes, oh, Indy was telling the truth about this guy. He is a Nazi. He's not going to pay me my money. So and it's part of his self-preservation because she needs to get out of there. Hence why no sooner did they get away on the boat, she's already trying to figure out the next clue and kind of brushes off the fact that Indy's upset that his friend has just been murdered.
Yeah, and even
okay. I have one more problem.
Otherwise, I'm going to be going through a see you next Tuesday phase here in this movie.
Tom, what were you saying, Tom?
I have one more problem here.
Oh, you have a problem.
And it's this. Okay, this is the problem I have. Is that so Indiana Jones talks about what he would do if he goes back in time and discuss how upset and hurt and in grief he is over Mutt's death and whatnot. So that's what they did with Mutt. And even one of the writers, David Koepp, said, because of the reaction to Shia and his character in the last film, he wouldn't be involved with the film. So they kill him off. Now you've got all these people who are pissed that they killed this character off. I'm like, you didn't like the character in the first place. Why are you complaining that they killed him off?
I admit I find it lazy that when it comes to making a movie when it comes to making a movie that takes place only over the course of a few days, that the only way they can think of to explain a character's absence is either divorce or dead. And I didn't find it believable.
Casting doesn't exist in this Hollywood that we live in.
I didn't find it believable that he would enlist even to piss him off because he was a greaser. And yeah, he becomes somewhat more of a square, and I can imagine the Indy did turn him around a little bit. But I think it would have been more believable if he got his draft number, realized he was going to be drafted, and Indy tried to persuade him to enlist so that way he could choose where in the armed forces he was going, and that he didn't do it because of stubbornness or whatever, and that's why he ended up on the front lines getting killed in Vietnam. But even then, I didn't buy, this grumpy Indy at the beginning of the movie doesn't seem like a guy who's depressed over his broken marriage and his son. Like, when he sees the picture of Marion on the fridge, he takes the fridge magnet and covers her face. He doesn't care. And it feels like he's just playing regular hair. Like, I just read an article from Esquire with Indy or with Harrison promoting the movie, and it's like, typical grumpy Harrison that all the, like when Mark Hamill jokes about when he does his impressions. And that's kind of how Indy felt to me. Like, it didn't seem like a guy who's depressed over his son's death. Now, I admit, when the camera's first panning around inside of his apartment, you do see the picture of Mutt in his military uniform and the flag. But because it was slightly out of focus, I wasn't positive if that was Mutt in the picture or not. But it didn't seem like a man whose mourning is in deep mourning or whatever. It's like regular Indy. And I get that because his work for hunting down the Ark was under a classified government contract, and the whole adventure in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was also classified because it started in a raid of a secret warehouse, that he can't talk about those things. Like, he can't teach Akator to his students if he wanted to, and I think he would know people would probably deride him for it without evidence, and the government's obviously not going to back up any evidence about that, even though they clearly exonerated him at the end of the fourth movie. But the idea that he's no longer an associate dean at Barnett College, it's like, well, I get that you're depressed, but wouldn't at that point they would just maybe promote him to professor emeritus status?
When you'd be giving lectures across the nation.
Right, and so it's like, so I didn't get why he's in New York at a new college. It seems like the only reason he's in New York, because they came up with the idea at some point, probably early in the screenwriting, that Voller is going to be pardoned from Operation Paperclip. He's going to be in there for the Apollo parade, and that much like the premise said 7 months ago when Lucasfilm put out the official press release, so that Indy has a problem with the fact that Nazis were being used to beat the Soviets in the space race. In which case, okay, that's why I could see there being a reason to put him in New York and have the Apollo thing there. Like, maybe Indy had tried to warn the government this isn't a good idea, and now he gets to go like, see, I told you. But they completely abandoned that idea. It's like Voller being part of the Apollo program has no bearing on the story. It has nothing to do with him being his evil plan. And Indy is never shown to even be aware that Voller worked with NASA. And so it's like, and on top of that, for people who don't know, the real Operation Paperclip did not change the identities of the Nazis and the Japanese they pardoned. What they did was they whitewashed their backgrounds to make it seem like, oh, they only joined like the Nazis or the Japanese because they're press ganged into it or whatever, and that they surrendered and it's over, and to the victor go the spoils, and people were mostly okay with it except for the ones who actually suffered under them directly.
Oh yeah.
So the fact that the CIA is oblivious to the fact that this guy was a Nazi, that he's living there under a different name, suggests to me that he just immigrated and changed his identity on his own. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me, why is the CIA even helping him trying to get to Indy? Like, they're there to chaperone him at the parade and on to Los Angeles to get his medal. Why the hell are they helping him break into the college storeroom? It's like, I know why Voller and his neo-Nazi stooges want to get in there, but why are the CIA agents helping? Like, when Helena locks Indy in the storeroom, you have the Agent Mason, played by Renee Wilson, comes up the steps. She's like, don't worry, Dr. Jones, we're not going to hurt you or whatever, because she genuinely didn't want to hurt him. But I'm like, well, why are you even involved in trying to corner him? It's like, what is this about? They never explained that. And so that just felt very...
I would have preferred if instead of his goddaughter would have been Dr. Jones and CIA agent lady on this adventure.
Right, because the CIA would be the one saying, oh, Indy, you're paranoid, Voller's a good guy, blah, blah, blah. And that way Indy could show them, no, this was Paperclip thing was a bad idea.
Agent Mason had this Pam Grier
She did.
Foxy Brown kind of like at quality to her. I'm just like, God, this would have been a better pairing than the goddaughter angle.
They interviewed her about being in this movie, and they said that when she read the script, she had a problem with the way her character was going to be killed off. And she went to James Mangold and said, look, I have a problem with this. And they don't say what the problem was. But she goes, I really don't like this. I don't think this is appropriate. And James Mangold goes, oh, good, because we're both on the same page. I was going to fix that. So thank you for, being on the same page as me. And he went and fixed it. As a matter of fact, he's on a episode of the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, and I sent it to Kat, where he sits down and says that when he got the script was going nowhere. Like he had to rewrite it, and he had to ask Disney and Lucasfilm for like a year just to rewrite it. And they went away, and then they came back and said, "Okay, you got your year." He rewrote it, and this is what we got.
Right, because again, that official press release of what the story was about and what the themes were going to be would have been a logical through line for the story. And again, the idea of even making Helena a goddaughter doesn't really have much of a point in the final movie because, again, if they wanted to push that Last Crusade parallel where Indy feels guilty about, in a sense, setting off her father's obsession and causing her to become more Belloc-like, basically, then maybe he could bring her around to rein that in, but he doesn't really get to do that. So it's like at this point, especially since he hasn't bothered looking her up for 18 years, then maybe don't make her a goddaughter and just have a different character entirely. Like you said, the CIA agent or somebody. Because I like the idea of having another femme fatale type indie girl who's not just a romantic interest or a good
That's
person.
where we're missing in this movie, a femme fatale.
Well, she's kind of a femme fatale because she keeps screwing him over and is out for herself.
She's a femme, all right. Fatale, that's debatable.
Well, she's kind of a bad guy, really, when you think about it. I mean, yeah, she's not in league with the Nazis per se, but...
Okay, I'm going to drink this rum over here.
Isn't that kind of what a fatale is, though?
Not the fatale I'm thinking of, but okay.
Well, tell me, I want to hear.
Nothing. There's nothing likable or charming about her.
Oh, well, sometimes femme fatales don't have much charming about them. They could be...
There's something about them, and she did not have that quality.
Like, I honestly did, like, for instance, when I was rewatching the films, I've never honestly liked the Elsa Schneider character that much from Last Crusade because I always thought she was a bit ditzy and doe-eyed, and I just never really cared, even though she's technically a femme fatale as well, because she seduced both of the Joneses and is trying to be set up as a good guy, even though I thought it was always obvious that she was a villain. But I've never really cared about her because I didn't find her to be that fun. Like, I just found Helena to be funner because, like, yeah, she's a dick and she's making no apologies about it. I thought that was funny.
I disagree.
Let's see. Daniel says, it brought a tear to my eye when Fleabag asked Indy if you could go back in time, what would you do? And Indy responds, I would go back and tell Mutt not to enlist. I would tell him that he would die. And that made me cry. It makes people more sympathetic towards Mutt Williams and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And that was probably the whole point.
No.
Yeah, that did move me a little bit when the way he brought that up. But I think it moved me on the grounds that what it did to him and Marion on that front there. But in a way, it also moved me because it showed that unlike his father, who was able to get that moment to reconcile things with him, Indy didn't have that. Indy had the moment, could have had that moment with him, and maybe they did have it at one point, or they almost had it, but they didn't probably fully have it, and that's what it's the guilt. It's the guilt of not getting him to do what he wanted him to do.
I felt the only reason they did that with Mutt was to justify the fact that they're once again going to recycle the broken old man trope. Because, again, there's no reason to do that at the end of Crystal Skull. Again, there's no reason to have him broken up with Marion because, again, these movies take place over the course of a few days. If you don't want her to be the lead girl in the movie, just say she's off visiting her mom or something. It's like there's no reason – or not her mom, that's right, because her mom would be dead, but visiting family or something or hanging out with a girlfriend somewhere. It's like it didn't –
Or playing with her grandkids that Mutt gave her.
Yeah, exactly. There's no reason it's like they had this idea that because they did it with Han Solo and Rick Deckard and Logan and Luke Skywalker, that and sort of with John Wick, but even though he was born out of that, it's like, let's do it with Indy. And it's like, do we have to do that with Indy? It's like it would have worked again if they'd made it obvious from the beginning what it is that's bugging him. Like, more, maybe not just that he lost his son, but that he would have preferred to share these things with his son. Like, he has no interest whatsoever in the moon landing. And it's like, dude, you've seen aliens, like interdimensional aliens coming here. Wouldn't you be excited at the idea that humans have harnessed the ability to at least go to space? And the fact that he doesn't care, given he's an archaeologist of all things, he loves exploration. He would be totally into that. So the only reason I could think of why he wouldn't be interested is maybe if he's depressed because he wanted to share that with his son, in much the same way that at the end of Last Crusade, he wished he had been able to share more things with his father. But they don't seem to do that. They seem to use it as simply Mutt's death as a plot device to explain why Indy's kind of, grumpy.
They're also repeating the same plot device as Last Crusade, because at least even though Indy had an issue with his father and always being obsessed with Grail and that part of history, the one thing they both had in common that were really at odds is the fact that their mother died. His mother died and his wife passed away. So here they're trying to do the same thing. Oh, it's because my son died, and that's where we're at odds. But even then, you would still have a reason to have Marion in this movie, and both of them could be involved in this adventure. Like, here's two people who are on the brink of separation because of what happened to Mutt, and maybe this adventure is what brings them back together, because that's what they're about. Like, the death of their son doesn't have to break their lives, like, because it is kind of a trope and kind of like art imitating life, that some marriages do not last because a child dies or because of something tragic. But here you have an opportunity to rekindle an old flame these two shared since 40 years ago, and you could have that again. But no,
yeah, it's like,
we get Fleabag. That's what we get.
Yeah, but I disagree, Dan. I don't think they did that to make people appreciate Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I think they did that again as a way to justify that they wanted to recycle the same trope that James Mangold already did in Logan, that was already done in those other movies I mentioned, and another way to get Mutt out of the movie. And it was like, checking those boxes. Because again, I agree with you, Daniel. I thought that was a great scene when he says, of all the things he could do with the dialogue, when she's like, oh, would you go hit up Cleopatra? And he's like, no, I would go back and, just a few years and tell my son not to. I thought that was a really great scene, but I wasn't feeling any of that from him in the first act of the movie during his depression thing.
Wouldn't get great when he's in the airplane? Instead of him having that memory with Basil, he should have just been looking out the window and having a memory of the last time he saw Mutt.
Right, that would have been great.
Maybe they had a fight at the house, and there's no dialogue. You just hear John Williams score and just see a silhouette of Senior, Junior, and Mom in the hallway arguing. And then he leaves and never comes back, and we never see him. And then you're thinking in your head, something happened to Mutt. He left wearing military gear. We don't know what happened. Maybe they're still not talking. And then you get to that scene in the boat, and then you realize what happened to Indy. That would have been a much better thing to do. And if you don't want to bring Shia back, then you fucking recast. That's the thing you can do.
Daniel says, I think Mutt could still be alive, and he's probably in a POW camp in Vietnam, and they could do one more movie with Indy finding out and going to Vietnam to save his son. No, because Indy going into the Vietnam War to seek out his son, that's not really an Indiana Jones story. Like, maybe if you want to write a fan fiction thing, but that doesn't really have the vibe of, like, maybe if you wanted that to be the prologue of another Indiana Jones movie where he rescues his son or whatever, but
then we went through this whole movie, so it would make this movie pointless.
Yeah, David says Indy doesn't care about the present. He'll care about the moon landing 1,000 years, like his father. That's a good point. In most cases, I would agree with you that he's not going to care about modern history. But given that, like, not many times in modern history do things happen which completely, like, that's on a whole other level, going to the moon as opposed to a famous person dying or another discovery of an ancient city. Like, that is this. I figured that would be a little bit of I get what you're saying, but I think there would be an exception.
Considering everything that Indiana Jones has seen, especially with that line that I don't believe in magic, but I have seen things, like, the idea of man going to the moon is something that he would be like, damn, wow, we did that.
Yeah. David says, would have been better with Marion and more of the movie. Bringing her back at the end felt forced. I did feel initially confused when she shows up at the end and she's totally normal, because the way Indy describes what happened to Marion to Helena is that, she was inconsolable, blah, 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 fell apart. And it's like, oh, well, her being normal and showing up is kind of, it means Indy was really the one who was inconsolable and completely broken up about it, which is probably why she left him. And I don't get why she came back, because I get that she's like, oh, they told me you came back, which isn't them being literal that he came back, but like figurative, like you're back, you're like out of your rut or whatever. But it still felt a little forced, especially since they ended the movie recycling dialogue and music from Raiders, like with Sala singing the same song and Marion doing the reverse of Where Does It Hurt, and she's the one doing it. It's like, I get what they're going for, but it's like, if you're putting, you can have some nostalgia in there. Like the Temple of Doom reference I thought worked because it was playing in line with the joke of of Helena making fun of him for wheezing while he's climbing up the hill. He's like, well, you've never had all this crap happen to you. But with the Raiders thing, it feels more like we're just trying to throw in nostalgia bait because, hey, let's remind you of that better movie. Rather than letting this movie end on its own terms. Like Crystal Skull has its own ending. It's not trying to, it's trying to be its own thing, like be another Indiana Jones movie rather than just be chock full of blatant references for the sake of having them.
But that's the thing that movies like this do lately, especially with how long since the last one. For whatever reason, when you get a new movie in a franchise as old as this one, it's almost biblical to do a nostalgia reference.
Yeah. And Daniel follows up saying, there's a scene at the end that even this guy from Screen Crush talked about, but there's a scene where he grabs his hat and that could mean there's one more. No, I think that simply means that they don't want you to think that Helena is going to pick up the hat. Like, that's not happening. It's like it's Indy's hat. It's going to stay Indy's hat.
James Mangold has come out and said, well, you just don't put a hat on a clothesline. And he stated that Indiana Jones retired from teaching, not being an archaeologist. So he said with him grabbing that hat, you could just imagine maybe him and Marion are going to go off on some adventure together of archaeology and digging things up and looking things up. So they could just be going off on their own, trying to rekindle their relationship by doing something like that. That's what that ending meant. That's what he said.
Right, because Harrison Ford's like, I'm done. I'm not doing it again, and we don't. I think that's why they had the bit even at the end of Crystal Skull, where initially Mutt's going to put on the hat because everybody thought that that's where they might be going with it, but we're afraid of that, and so Indy snatches the hat from him because that was Spielberg's way of making the point that no, even if that movie had been more successful, we're not passing the hat and the whip on to Mutt. It's Indy's hat and whip, and it's going to stay that way. And I think that's just Mangold's way of saying the same thing. I was like, no, we're not giving it to Helena or anybody else. It's Indy's. And so Indy, I have no doubt that this being a corporate IP, that eventually down the line it might get rebooted. I don't think it's going to break even by any stretch of the imagination, given the insane amount of money they put into this.
And considering how all the blockbusters have been performing this month, I don't think it's barely going to break even.
Yeah, so I think
not because of the quality of the movie. I just think that audiences just are not coming to the theaters like we thought they would. Also, it's a cannibalistic week after week after week now that in hindsight. So
that's true. Too many blockbusters being released simultaneously. Daniel goes off with his theories now. He says, I got it. It's something I came up with when I was taking a walk. They could do this if they do another one. It could jump to 73, a week before the end of the Vietnam War. We cut to Vietnam and we see Short Round grown up and a spy for the Chinese government, and he's spying on a POW camp in Nam and sees that Shia is there, or Mutt Williams is there in the camp, and he learns that Mutt will be executed. So Short Round runs off and goes back to America, where he goes to see Indiana and tells him that his son Mutt is alive, to which David responds to all this saying, that's a Rambo movie.
Jesus Christ.
That is the plot of Rambo 2, which is a conspiracy theory, mind you, because for those who don't know, the Vietnamese, when the war was over, their attitude was basically, okay, we won. There's no reason to have animosity, whatever. One of my history teachers who was a Vietnam veteran even went back there all the time on summer vacation. He loved it there. And he said there was no animosity, but that they had no animosity towards him being a Vietnam veteran because nobody over there talks about it. They're like, we won. It's over. Move on. So, the whole Rambo 2 plot.
It's easy to say that when you win.
Right. And so the whole Rambo 2 plot that, there's still, POWs being kept years after the fact. It's all bullshit. It's like there's nothing to that. But that was a funny punchline there, David.
Someday we'll talk about how. Someday we'll talk Rambo 3 and how he goes and helps the Taliban.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Daniel, but it still doesn't fit really with the formula of what an Indiana Jones movie is. I don't really think. Again, unless it was just a prologue, in which case people would expect Mutt to be on the rest of the journey after that, which I don't think people would want. Anyway, so we've gone through that. The action scene that starts inside the college storeroom where she's pretending to be interested in fortune and glory and all of that, and we find out that she's actually, kind of lying about it. And Daniel makes a good point. He says, I was so pissed when they cornered Indy in the university relic room and forced him to push the shelves of relics on top of the thug. He destroyed a lot of the relics that he spent his whole life acquiring. And I hate that because I love and respect history. Yeah, I kind of felt the same way when he did it. Because it's like she locks him in here, and you have the 2 CIA agents telling they're not going to hurt him. You have the crazy Boyd Holbrook neo-Nazi guy running around shooting the place up, and Indy knocks this stuff over, and I'm like thinking, oh my God. And there goes all that stuff just destroyed.
I just don't know how Agent Marin looks at all these people and think to herself, yeah, I can trust them.
Yeah, I didn't get that either.
I'm not gonna. No. I'm not
yeah, that's the thing. That whole CIA subplot to me didn't work. It felt kind of forced because, the CIA was around, and the actress Shawnette Renee Wilson likened it to how the FBI and the CIA would recruit black people into to infiltrate the Black Panther Party back in those days. It's like, well, okay, just because that's happening, that doesn't mean it fits in the story. But again, I didn't think that CIA part made any sense at all. But that whole chase sequence, I remember when they first released the trailer and you could tell it was totally a CG face and not Ford on the horse. I thought, that's just because it's early and they haven't done the final VFX yet. They just had to get the trailer out. No, it looked just as bad.
Oh, yeah. That's horrible.
No, there's a few shots I am told of him actually on the horse for real, but a lot of it.
He got pissed because they were trying to help him off the horse. He goes, "Look, I'm an old man on a horse. Let me be an old man on the horse."
Yeah,
that's
but
what Harrison Ford was telling the
I've survived 5 plane crashes. Let me get on a horse.
They're like, "Sir, you busted your arm 2 weeks into shooting, and we're out for 6 weeks, and that ballooned the budget. We have to make sure you don't injure yourself again."
Get off my lawn.
Daniel has continued his theory. But he's continued it to the point where he brings it up to match it up to the young Indiana Jones episode where you see the old Indy.
Yeah, he says, Indy says, I got Mutt into this because he went to Vietnam to piss me off. So Indy says, I'll get him out. So Indy, Short Round, and Fleabag go to Vietnam to save Mutt Williams. So they go to the camp and fight their way to get Mutt. And after a whole cool fight, they get him. And at the end, Indy gets in a fight and loses an eye. And that then Mutt kills the guy who took Indy's eye, and they all run off into the jungle and get a plane to fly off. And Indy on the plane passes the fedora and the whip to Mutt. And then we see the plane. No. We see the plane fly off into the sunset. That would be cool, and it could give them a spin-off option. Who would you rather see, Mutt or Fleabag? Neither. Neither. Because here's the thing. I know what you're talking about with the old Indy with the eye patch from the Young Indiana Jones series, but he says in the course of one of those episodes that he lost his eye in 1957, which is now the year of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. We know that didn't happen. And they actually eliminated, when they edited all the episodes together as mini movies where they'd stitch them together, they got rid of all of those little bookend segments with old Indy. So I'm not even sure if any of those are even on there anymore. But again, no, nobody wants to see him pass the whip on to anybody. It's like, we don't have to have, I would rather see them reboot with a new actor and a new continuity before seeing somebody else pick up the hat and the whip as a different character from that same universe. It's like, no.
We don't need Dick Grayson taking over the mantle again. We don't need Damian Wayne taking over the mantle. We don't need Donna Troy taking over for Diana. We're fine with Indy always being Indy. Nobody needs to bullwhip. Nobody needs to reboot them. Tell new stories. There's a lot of antiquities out there you can play with. You can do that, and that's fine.
David says, but that's a trope too. Indy destroys so much history discovering it, which is absolutely true. The Crusaders' tomb, the Grail Temple, so much more. Yeah, Indy does destroy a lot of stuff that he's trying to save.
He destroys our bones.
Yeah, and then so he destroys all that stuff, and it is a trope. I admit that in that instance, it felt kind of sad because it is kind of his collection. But then again, I also thought at the same time, this is the guy who always advocates that things should be in a museum and not in private store. But this is in a storeroom, you know.
And also, it's either that or a bullet to the head. So a lot of people will choose destroying stuff over a bullet to the head.
Yeah. No reboot. Keep the indie-verse and the cool. Okay, you can keep the cool history alive, but you can keep the indie-verse and reboot. Maybe not in a new continuity, but reboot with a different actor and have adventures set in different time periods as well, rather than.
Or, and I'm just going to throw this out there, and this is only if there's a lot of foresight. What?
David says after Crystal Skull, he loses an eye to a flirkin.
Oh, aren't you cute? Yeah, let's not reference another movie I hate, please. Thank you. But they could probably do what they did with Stan Lee. Just write some dialogue about past adventures of Indiana Jones. Get Harrison Ford for maybe like a month. Shoot all the scenes with him in his study, and he's talking to an interviewer and said, "Well, let me tell you about this or this adventure or that adventure," and then it cuts to the new actor playing Indiana Jones in the flashbacks, and you can still have Ford in the movies. He's just retelling his younger days. And you don't have to balloon up the budget because of we're gonna de-age him again. Fuck no. That's an option. I don't think they have the foresight for that.
Or they could always do it where he had a student that was influenced or who we don't know, but he was influenced by Indiana Jones, and he himself becomes just like Indiana Jones going after antiquities. And that way it's not someone who's going to have the hat and whip, it's someone who's out on his own. So that's your own spin-off right there.
We didn't miss the comment, Daniel.
He says, I missed the comment where Short Round finds him in a camp. Short Round would be no, I got that comment. I didn't skip that one. I got it. But anyway,
I'm glad that those aren't super chats. Otherwise, we've been bankrupting screen.
So the chase scene through the streets and everything in the subway, I thought was kind of fun, but again, too CG. And it goes on a bit long, which is kind of an issue with these scenes. But when they meet Sala, and he says that Indy got him and his family out of Egypt during the war, which makes sense because he wouldn't want to be in Cairo during World War II for sure. And I liked that idea. But when Sala takes him to the airport and arranges for him to go, and he tells him that I brought a second passport, and he's like, I miss the desert, I miss the sea, I miss waking up and not knowing what the new adventures the day is going to bring to us. And Indy's like, well, those days have come and gone, and this isn't an adventure. And I'm thinking, don't tease me with the prospect of Sala going on the adventure if he's not going to go on the damn adventure. Because
give them hell, Indiana Jones.
Yeah, because I agree with him. It's like, that's kind of what I want this movie to feel like. In a sense, I wanted it to be more like Temple of Doom and more separate, and not just the Raiders plot again, like be a totally new thing. Yeah. But like when Sala says, do something new, let's go out there, let's go. And that was a bit of nostalgia I actually liked, because really the only time we've really seen Sala is he helps him out in Last Crusade towards the end of the movie, and then he helps him out, of course, in Raiders quite a bit, but you could tell that they have a longer history than that. And it's sort of like Bond and Felix. They always meet and talk like they're, brothers and have been on all these adventures that we never get to see. So I kind of wanted Sala to go there, and maybe it would have made more sense for Indy to argue, again, playing into the themes of the movie, that Sala, you've got family. You babysit your grandkids every day. I don't have family anymore. I got to, I'm more expendable than you are. You got to stay behind. Like that, I think would have been playing into that more and being kind of sad because Indy doesn't feel that anybody, like he doesn't have a reason to stay. Like he doesn't care whether or not he's going to live or die because he feels that nobody cares about him anymore, at least not in the way that he thinks.
I care.
Yeah, I care. I do, and Sala obviously cares, but Indy doesn't seem to see that. So
it would have been another good thing, a field trip movie.
Yeah. But what do you think of Sala being in the film, Tom?
I liked him in the film. Would I like to have seen him going on that trip with him? Yes. And it wasn't a glorified cameo where they wanted to do it in Crystal Skull and just have him in the background.
Yeah, at the wedding, he said
he would only come back if he could, be somewhat part of the story. So in a way, he is. He gets Indy out of things. He helps Indy when he needs it, and it's sort of like a callback to Raiders, where he hides out with Nala. You know, where Indy hides out there for a bit with him. So it sort of reminds that of him. And it's kind of funny that Sala is now a cab driver. Not like that's a stereotype of any kind.
No, but it's historically accurate.
Yeah.
So
it's not a stereotype.
In a way, you got in that little scene. What has Sala been up to all this time? Boom! He tells you right then and there. Oh well, I'm here, and my family made it. You know, thank you for helping us get out of the desert to come to America, and this and that, and so you get in a very abbreviated version of what have I been up to since Last Crusade. This is what I've been up to. You know, so it was done in a way where it's not exposition, but it is, but it's not like a long ass excuse of why he's there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Movie's already 30 minutes too long at this point.
Yeah, I did feel the movie, after the prologue, I felt that it was kind of taking a little while to get going on this new adventure, like especially since they weren't leaning in. Because again, you see it's blurry when the camera's panning through his apartment when you see the picture of Mutt and then in his uniform and the flag next to it. And then when Indy finds out that the CIA basically told the cops that they framed him for murder because the CIA is like, well, we don't want to take the fall for this. We'll just blame Indy, even though it doesn't, even though he's innocent. And you hear on the TV that when they're putting out the call for to be on the lookout for Indy, that his son was killed in Vienna. And I barely heard it because the camera's already panning to something else. And I'm like, wait, did I hear that right? Is it like I wasn't sure if I had seen and heard what I thought I saw and heard up to this point until you get to that scene later on the boat. So it's trying to be a theme, but it doesn't want to lean into it very much. So, yeah, let's see. JH Edit says those Temple of Doom stereotypes were way over the top. Oh, absolutely, they were over the top. Eating the bugs and the snakes and the monkey brains, and showing the Maharaja as like some immature little kid, but Captain Blumberg of the British is the guy we have to call on to save the day, and that was a bit much. But I still love that movie. Guilty pleasure.
I don't mind the stereotypes in that movie. It works.
Daniel says, when they traveled back in time through the Fisher, I was so happy to see time travel Indiana Jones because Indy becomes Doctor Who, but then I was worried they would disrupt time.
I got some stuff to say about that.
We'll get to that. We'll circle back around to that when we get to the climax. But keeping on Sala for a minute, David says, I so wanted to see Sala show up later in Greece or somewhere. He could have shown up to facilitate the boat or something. Exactly. It's like have Sala be the one getting the boat, or because Sala, I'm sure, has other connections. Because here was something my dad actually mentioned. He says the guy on the boat should have been the captain of the Bantu Wind. Because it's in the Mediterranean Agency. Sala is a friend of his. Sala can make the call. It's like, hey, we need you again. That would have been a fun little callback. Rather than having Antonio Banderas kind of just shows up for a cameo, it didn't make much of an impression.
Is he still around?
Yeah.
The actor of the Bantu Wind?
Yeah.
Okay. I just didn't know if he was still alive. Maybe that's why they did it.
Well, I would assume so, because the Nazis didn't sink the ship.
I'm talking about in real life. Is he still alive?
In real life? I'd have to look that up. I'm not exactly sure who played him. JH Edit says, for all its faults, I love Temple of Doom as well. Yeah. So when we get to the Hotel Atlantique, I like the whole noir type thing where she's holding this auction and everybody's kind of betting on it and stuff. And we see the kid is already interested in aviation because he's got the mock cockpit there, and then he mentions the Wright brothers later on. So he's clearly not just a fan, he's really into it, which is obviously a setup for later on in the movie. But I did think it was funny when he's like, you stole it. Well, then I stole it. Yeah, well, it's called capitalism. So capitalizing on each other's misfortunes, and how Indy just kind of sabotages this auction and it leads into this chase, which admittedly goes on a bit long. Uh, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Hmm.
It got to the point where I'm just like, okay, what's happening here? I don't know where we're going here. Are we going anywhere? It feels like it was never ending. And that's the thing about this movie. All these sequences after the prologue just don't feel exciting. You're just watching it and you're just waiting for it to end.
Yeah, particularly since Voller escapes the hotel with the dial. At the end of the chase, he still has it, and despite Teddy and Helena's attempts to ditch Indy, they fail to ditch him. So really, nothing really changes at the end of this chase sequence. It's like, okay, he's got the dial, and those three are still like together. So yeah, nothing really. It's a chase scene that happens because you have the action bit at the hotel, and they needed to make an escape, but it didn't need to go on as long as it did. Kind of like when they have that other random character show up who apparently she was engaged to as part of a long con. Which, okay, I thought that was kind of funny, but it's prolonging the action scene that doesn't need to be there. But yeah, and then
you know what would have been cool in this scene is if Lau showed up to the auction. That would have been a cool callback.
right, that's true. Because I know Lau's son was supposed to be in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Have either senior or junior just show up and just like, oh god, not this guy again.
That'd be great. They're still in the business of buying relics.
It's like as the moment he sees him, he just gets this PTSD just by looking at Dr. Jones. It's like, you.
JH Edit says, I liked it when Indy went MacGyver style with the gum. Yeah, it was kind of funny. And then when the Teddy's like, I thought you went to school with the Wright brothers. Because the kid obviously wouldn't know. And then Elena's like, come on, that was funny. It's like, yeah, that was
he's just ribbing him, and it's not funny.
I thought it was pretty funny.
Oh well.
Especially when she says, come on, you have to admit that was pretty funny, like rubbing it in his face. But
well, you're not a tall drink of jokes either, lady.
Yeah. Tom, what did you think of that whole sequence at the hotel and then the tuk-tuk chase and all that?
I thought it was very good.
What?
What did you think of the hotel sequence and with the auction and the whole tuk-tuk car chase thing that happens right after?
The hotel sequence reminded me of the opening sequence to Temple of Doom.
Mm.
You know, just where, you know, where he's like, well, here's this, you're gonna pay me this, you know, but only it was this time it was the girl wanting to pay, and the chase was
come on.
The chase was fun, but I the gum thing I didn't. I thought that was a little
fixing on the gum.
The gum thing was a little too far.
That's what's too far. The gum. You gotta be kidding me. That's too far. Come on, Tom.
I really didn't have a problem with this movie. Maybe
the
one or
gum
two small things, but I liked the movie. I didn't see anything wrong with the film. I had no problem with it. I don't analyze every film I go see and break it down of what's wrong with it and what bothers me about it. I go to have fun.
To admit it went on a little bit too long, and you're focusing on the gum.
The gum.
Oh god, that's gonna be another running gag for us. The gum.
JH Edit says, I got some Casablanca vibes with the hotel sequence. Definitely. That's why I thought the movie, given that she's not really out for, she's only out for her self-interest. Voller's out for his self-interest. Indy's the only one who doesn't really care about using this thing. He just wants to put a stop to it all. So I did get kind of like Sam Spade, and so I got Maltese Falcons type vibes when they were showing that part in the trailer. And then when you see that scene, because up until this point in the movie, Indy still doesn't have a vested interest in acquiring the dial for the sake of using it. He just wants to keep it out of Voller's hands at this point. Yeah, so then this is also where the movie slows down more too. The whole sequence where they go to Greece, which begins with Voller killing the CIA because they said, well, we're not going to give you your medal anymore because we had to have a formal military extraction, and we're taking you back to the University of Alabama, which I thought was funny that that's where he's been hanging out all these years. And he's like offended at the idea, no, I can't go back to Alabama.
I'm not
So,
seeing in the South. Sheesh.
yeah, so he kills her and everybody else on the helicopter, and I'm thinking, well, you can't take that helicopter all the way to Greece, so they're going to have to ditch it somewhere. And
I'm glad you bring that up.
because here's the thing, at the end of the movie, Indy is back home in New York and he's no longer a fugitive, but they never brought up, like, why is he no longer a fugitive? So I'm guessing wherever they ditched the helicopter, somebody like CIA, somebody must have found it, put 2 and 2 together, because it's kind of a lingering thing. Because I'm watching this helicopter flying away. I'm like, well, he's not going to fly to Greece. So I know that he's aware that he has to go to the next logical point, which would be the shipwreck where the device was discovered. Because, we didn't mention, the device in this movie is a fictional version of the Antikythera mechanism, which, depending on who you ask, is either dated from 87 BC or as far back as 200 BC. So theoretically, you could push it back another 12 or 13 years and say that Archimedes made it, because he certainly was brilliant enough to actually design it, but it was only in reality something that would predict or determine when certain constellations would be seen in the sky and would keep track of the 4-year calendar for the Olympics.
He was a man ahead of his time, literally.
Right. And so that was kind of, I get that why Voller would go to the site of the shipwreck. It makes sense that he would know where he'd want to go, but so the helicopter thing, it's like, okay, you had to ditch that somewhere and catch up, but I get it, it's an indie movie, all the villains catch up and stuff eventually. I just felt that the movie kind of slowed down in this bit where, we go to Greece, we meet Ronaldo, we have that nice quiet scene on the boat, we go to check the box of like the creepy crawly scene where they're scuba diving, and you have the eels, but they're all kind of CG, and so it's like, I would have liked that scene to look a little more real. Yeah, and when
not in this age of filmmaking.
Yeah, when Ronaldo is talking about how they have to be careful when they're diving and all the I like that Ronaldo is showing a lot more safety conscious than the Ocean Gate people. Jesus, it's like, okay, too soon. But anyway,
look at my picture. Look at my picture. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Let's see. JH Edit says the hotel is also cool because we finally see the older Indy back in his legendary jacket and hat. He gets, well, we do, because we see that that of course, he's going to take that outfit with him, and that is kind of the first time, you're right, that he kind of dons it as an older guy in this movie.
He's got a lot of mileage in that getup.
That's right. David says it's the University of Alabama because the rocket program is in Huntsville. That's true. I just thought it was funny that Voller's reaction at the idea of being sent back to the University of Alabama was something that was like unconscionable for him. He couldn't stand the idea of having to go back to Huntsville to be at the university. It's like he feels he's been quietly toiling away for 24 years or 25 years, and it's like this is his chance. He's going to seize it.
Yeah.
Daniel says, I hate that they killed Zorro in this movie. Yeah, I feel they kind of did that to show the Helena character that Indy was right about Voller, because she didn't believe him when he said when Indy said he was a Nazi, and it's like now that she realizes that he's right and he is this vicious guy who's going to kill everybody, that he's, like he says, he's not going to pay you your money, and that's kind of what convinces her.
You would think that with everything that's been happening up until that point, that whether he's a Nazi or not, she would be like, something's not right here.
Well, I don't know if she didn't really see him at the college storeroom, because she just heard that people were coming and immediately ran away. And then in the hotel, it's like, he got the dial and left. And so they just tried to chase him down, and they defended themselves from her trying to, smash the back of his car window. And she tries to strangle him at one point with the whip strap. So she still doesn't necessarily think that he's a villain until really.
Nah.
Well, again, there's no reason for her to think that he's a Nazi. She's just, because again, she doesn't really.
She has a lot of reason to suspect that people will kill for what she has, especially after what happened in the hotel. So she should have her guard up regardless.
Well, yeah, because in the hotel, they're pissed off because the agreement was that she was going to pay them, and when they find out that this, because remember the guy says, that wasn't our agreement. And then she's like, well, because she's hosting this auction. And then when Indy starts, barking at him, that's when they draw their guns. And so, like, they were mad at her because she was changing the terms of the deal.
Yeah, I'll leave it there.
And so that's kind of where that goes. But see, JH Edit says, weren't the Nazis killing Ronaldo's men by pulling their auction? Yeah, they did. They killed. I can't remember which one they killed or which one went down with them.
Killed the one she wanted to bang later. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I forgot that part because I couldn't remember who. For a second, I thought it was Ronaldo, but then it wasn't because he's still back on the boat.
You don't kill Zorro like that. You shoot him. That's what you do.
Yeah, I did kind of wish that if you're gonna bring Antonio Banderas in as an ally of Indiana Jones, you should use him. And they didn't. I kind of wanted to see a bit more from that character if you're going to bring him in. Granted, he warned people in advance that it's just a glorified cameo. But it's like, okay, and I thought it was kind of neat that she kind of
Fleabag. So
yeah, and then they talked. When she lies and says it's an Alexandretta, I'm like, oh, another Last Crusade reference, and I thought maybe we'll go to Alexandretta this time and, go to the remains of the old, lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the world. But no, instead they go to Sicily, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. The dynamite stick blew up the engine. He kicked the bomb down into kicked the dynamite down into the engine room. The bomb goes off. There's smoke coming out everywhere. And I don't see any other boats around here, but he watches them and decides that just because the boat turns, it's like, well, they're in a small little boat, so they're not going to make the big decision for their decision is going to be get to the nearest coast, but he decides that because they're turning, that must mean they're not going to Alexandria. and the
fact that they made it on the boat just because they had a full tank of gas is about as believable as what you mentioned earlier. It's like, well, he didn't make it all the way on a helicopter, yet they made it all the way with a boat.
That's why I'm wondering if the idea is that they just went somewhere else and then just got another transport, which I'm thinking would have made more sense, and then somebody had to come along and.
No, because they only made one stop. It was a non-stop trip.
What'd you think of the whole underwater eel sequence and stuff in the boat, Tom? And the stuff on the boat.
Tell us how much you liked it.
I liked that they said that they're like snakes. No, they're not. They're like snakes. No, they're not. I like that
he was freaking out about them being eels very early. It's just like, why are you freaking? They're just eels. You've seen eels before.
But they are like snakes. He's not wrong.
Yeah.
But eels don't constrict you like a snake, so you should be fine. True.
I did. Well, yeah. Well, neither do most of the snakes in the Well of the Souls, but he was still afraid of them too. That was actually. I did think that was actually kind of funny. And I did like how because I was wondering when they're going through the whole lore of, the code that Archimedes would have, inscribed on this tablet, and they're trying to figure out like what it is, and she kind of bullshits him on it. And Indy, back on the boat, he sees that this thing is too heavy, and so he takes it, and he kind of wants to break it, and that you have that moment there where the kid actually says like a genuine interest, like his charlatan ways are kind of put on the back burner for a minute, as he's kind of genuinely excited at the idea of this archaeology thing, and Indy seems kind of encouraged by that and gives it to him to let him look at it, which I thought was kind of neat, because it's like he's sharing his passion with somebody else for a brief moment until
they're trying to have a short round moment again.
Yeah, and then so I liked that, and then he burns the thing away, and you see that it's the other code, and they figure out they're going to Sicily. And I was like, oh, that's what Indy was teaching his students at the beginning of the movie when he was talking about the siege of Syracuse. And that college student's like, Syracuse, New York. He's like, no, not that Syracuse. Which, if you're in a college course with him at that level, you're not going to be falling asleep like a high school student or a middle school student. You're going to be invested.
If you know, like if he's as famous as he is in this world, you would take his class just to be in his presence, period. You might not walk out wanting to be an archaeologist, but you're in the presence of a legend, okay?
Right. Well, that's a good question, because, again, the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull would still be classified. He wouldn't have talked about that. But I wonder if he had told anybody about what happened in India and what happened in with The Last Crusade. Because I get the sense that regular people don't even know about Indy's accomplishments.
Regular people might not, but if you follow the track of all the students he's had in his classes in Raiders and Last Crusade, he would be packing those classrooms up until this point. People are interested in everything he's done. They might not know all the classified stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that he's probably done, probably a lot of essays, dissertations, books he's probably written where people want to get involved in him. But movie's gonna movie. And the bitch.
The JH Edit says, what happened to those diamonds that he gave her?
Sheesh. I'm not gonna finish that sentence.
I don't remember the diamonds.
Yeah, she probably
because he went to pay her, and he goes, well, here, this will be better than money, and he gives her diamonds.
Oh, that's right.
Is it though?
Well, I mean, if she knows, she probably knows a good defense for it. That's for sure.
Is it though?
Yes, I'm not exactly sure what happened to the diamonds, but JH Edits follows up that it's a little spark of his magic coming through, probably much like Short Run. Yeah, like the kid's finally kind of warming up to him a bit, and that follows through when they get to Syracuse, and these tourists are there, and like this is the first time that I can remember that you actually see tourists at the places that Indy is visiting, which to me was the most man out of time moment in the movie, because it's like, you go out on these adventures and you assume that they're going to take place in faraway lands, blah, blah, blah. No, we've actually gotten to the point where we're actually surrounded by tourists, taking pictures and doing all the touristy kind of crap. And these kids kind of make fun of Teddy for being poor. And so he's like, fuck you. And he picks their pocket to go buy ice cream.
That was a bit forced.
Yeah, it was kind of there. It's like there's nothing wrong. It's like he's in a straw hat. It's not like there's anything wrong with him, but they're making fun. It's like, really? Okay, that's a little weird. But he goes to get the ice cream, gets kidnapped, and Indy and Helena, who are apparently buying equipment for this next part of the next leg of the expedition, realize it and decide that they have to follow him. So they steal a car going up the hill. And at first I thought, oh, we're going to have another action scene. So I'm glad it didn't go into this whole big chase
Thank God.
They just drive up the hill, they park the car, and they go to a real place, by the way, the Ear of Dionysius, which was carved deliberately as a limestone cave to hold water storage for Sicily. And after an earthquake in the Middle Ages, it could no longer do that. But it still has some water.
That's where my dad made a joke, Dionisio, because his name is Dionisio, which is basically Dionysius. So my dad got a little chuckle. It's pronounced Dionisio. And he said it so loud, I started laughing during that scene. I'm like, oh, sweet Jesus.
I did like, though, that the kid had he kind of broke the whole, much like when he was on the boat and he had that little moment bonding with Indy over the archaeology. He does something that an actual kid would probably do. He wanders off to go buy ice cream,
Yeah. I know the moment he walked into the Ear of Dionysus, I was just disappointed I didn't find Van Gogh in there.
Of course. So I like that Voller kidnaps the kid, because what can make Voller and the Nazis more evil? You gotta kidnap stealing candy from a baby. We're gonna kidnap a kid eating ice cream. It's like, okay. So
short of shooting him, but sure, steal him. Why don't you?
They go into the cave and they do the da 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 da, echoing through, because it echoes 16 times. At least the real cave does. They admittedly find their way into the passage a little easy. Well, that's that they find it easily. It's just that because there's no guards around or security, they're able to, again, to David's point, that they desecrate things, and then they to gain access to the secret passage. He says, well, in Venice there were couples around, but they were different than the tourists in 69. Yeah, that's what I kind of mean when, you're right, there were tourists in Venice in Last Crusade, but these ones felt more like what the stereotype is of American tourists overseas that you see there in Sicily. That's kind of how I felt about it.
At least they weren't insufferable like they are today.
Yeah, and David says, see, the kid is Helena's short round, not for Indy. It's paralleling her, I tell you, setting her up as a potential new Indy.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen.
I don't think that's going to happen, and maybe they were thinking about that early on, but
Stop making fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
I don't think that would happen also because she's got plenty of other things on her plate that she would rather do, I think, anyway.
Nobody's going to go see her adventures either, so no.
I would.
Of course you would, Tom. But if we're not talking about you,
Well, don't bang on it, Ernesto.
I'm already here. I might as well capitalize. See?
Okay, Daniel's hot topic says this sucks. I just heard Dial of Destiny is making less than the Flash.
You just heard that now?
That was funny. That was funny. And so Indy and Helena are moving through the cave, and this is where he finally asks her, like, where did you find this kid? And she's like, well, I caught him picking my pocket outside a casino, and he wouldn't let go of the car door. And it's like Indy immediately notes the parallel to Short Round, and he reassures her that, they're not going to hurt him because they need him to guide them through the tunnel to take them where they're going. And so we just got to get there before they do. As Voller is, bringing up the rear, the kid has been handcuffed to the big, I don't even know his name. They didn't do, this guy's not really.
Giant meathead. That's what.
Yeah, giant meathead. You're right. And because you could tell because Voller and all his guys are going across the bridge at the same time. And this big guy, they collapse through the bridge. I'm like, okay, Temple of Doom moment, except this time we're not going to die by falling into the water. But they get washed away, and Voller callously says, I'll just leave them both. And, of course, the big guy drowns because he can't fit through the cage at the bottom, and the kid was savvy enough to get the key and get himself out.
And
kind of a short run moment.
Disappointed we didn't get the next scene that should have come after that.
What was that?
Meathead coming out of the water angry, and then something happening to him after. No, he just drowned. Which I was surprised. I'm just like, you're building this. You got this huge dude who can do some damage. I'm expecting him to do something after, like maybe rip the handcuff up, and he's got a piece of metal in his hand, in his arm, and the kid has to come up with something to maybe drop a stone on him or something. Kind of like I was expecting something like that to happen, and it doesn't. I'm just like, huh. Well, all right then. Let's go to the next scene. That was anticlimactic.
Yeah. Let's see. JH Edit says, no, the Flash came in lower. Yeah, that's true. The Flash did come in lower. It's only up to it's up to 210 million after a couple weeks. Whereas they project it to Indy to make 152 by the end of the 4th of July, which isn't good.
Which it will not. Maybe it'll make 80.
Daniel says, yeah, how did Short Round get caught by Indy? I think Short Round knows how to kick ass. We see him use something like karate and Temple of Doom. Well, he got caught because it's Indiana Jones and he caught the kid picking his pocket. Just because you have those skills doesn't mean you're going to come out on top every time. Plus, he's a little kid.
Pickpockets are not fighters. They are cowards. They run. They steal and run. Yeah,
they're sleight of hand guys. That's kind of what they do. So that's kind of how that happens. But I kind of dug, moving through the cave. I thought it was kind of neat, old indie moments. And then they're climbing up the hill and they make the Temple of Doom reference. And they get up to the top and we see the puzzle that they have to solve. And she just wants to break out the doors. He's like, they can come through the door. We're just going to go. And he talks about the water displacement. I'm like, wait a minute. So it seems like by displacing the water just causes a little bit of it to go into the drain, and that's what causes the trap door to open. It kind of reminded me of the opening of Raiders, where if you step into the shaft of light, it makes the spikes fly out of the wall. like the logic isn't entirely there. Like it just took a little bit of the water to spill over into the drain to cause the trap door to open. But
wait, you could have just grabbed a cup and just poured it in there.
Yeah, whereas, but then again, like I said, the precedent has already been set with Raiders, where putting your hand in a light shaft causes it to fly out of the wall. So okay, so I thought that was a fun, exploring through the cave type of thing. And when
also, did I miss a scene? Wasn't it supposed to be like a boulder scene that we see in the trailer? And
it's in the trailer, but it's not. It wasn't in the movie. I didn't see it in the movie. Right? You're right. Were we right about that, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, it wasn't.
I thought that we were going to see the boulder when they were in the cave. I thought they were going to have that. So there's a look on Indy's face, like he had a look like, oh no, not again. Okay, there was that look in that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right.
Yeah, they cut that from the movie. So
also, big guy Meathead has a name in the movie. His name is
we know he has a name.
Hauke. That's his character's name. And he's a YouTuber. In real life, his name is Oliver Richters. He's 7'2", and he's nicknamed the Dutch Giant. And he's a professional bodybuilder, fitness model, and actor. And his debut was in Black Widow. That's
Oh,
Ursula Major.
Oh, he's the
oh,
guy with
that
the arm
guy.
wrestling thing. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right. Yeah.
JH Edit says
Maybe.
Indy probably caught him with his whip around the ankle as he was running. Yeah, probably. Caught short round. But David says, I think I saw Indy made 60 this week. Yes, it made 60 here and 70 overseas for 130 million over its opening, but they're going to extend the so-called opening to include tomorrow and the 4th of July. But even then, it's only expected to go up another 22 million. I think maybe that might be domestic, so maybe it might be a little higher, but yeah, it's not doing well. JH Edits, yeah, Flash made 55. David says, but I like that they were using the classic solve the traps trope. Yeah, of course. Solving the traps trope is in all the Indiana Jones movies. They have it here. Though it would have been nice if there were like more like traps aspect to it, because again, it didn't seem like they displaced the water, but it's not like they fall into a trap by going down the waterfall thing. It's like they needed to go that way. I felt like that shot in the trailer with the boulder was her pulling it on the rope, like she's mitigating a disaster by, wait, let's move the boulder out of the way before it crushes us type of thing. So it is neat, though. I did like the whole old school Indy going through the, exploring the tomb type of stuff. And so when they find the tomb and she's distracted by the inscription, by the sarcophagus, he's like, yeah, it's a phoenix, blah, blah, blah. She's like, no, but it has propellers. And then when they open the tomb and you see the watch, and it's a 60s watch, and it's like, oh, this movie's going to validate the causal time paradox, which means that even before you have gone back in time, if you do something that changed the past, that's going to be evident before you go back in time. Meaning that if Voller was aware of that to take note of it, he would know he already failed and shouldn't have gone. But of course, he's not going to be aware of it because it's almost like he faded. Like, it's destiny, if you will. And so I like that when Indy and Helena see that, they're like, oh, God, this might be real. Of course, they interpreted it differently, thinking that maybe Archimedes had at some point traveled to the future. But they take the dial and, they put it together. And finally, you have the classic moment, which felt very like Last Crusade, or even Crystal Skull, where at the very last second, when the hero's about to, Indy's about to do whatever he needs to do with the object, the villain comes up the corridor and is like, I'll take that. And so when the kid shows up, I felt that when she ran out of the cave with the kid, I'm like, okay, this is it. It's now going to be Indy's movie. He's in the driver's seat. And now we're going to see what we came to see. And instead, he immediately gets caught and dragged off to the airplane. And it's like, because he even kicked up the classic score once she and the kid ran away. And I'm like, yes, this is it. They're going to turn on the dial in the cave and we're going to go for it. But then it's like, oh, we're not going to have the big fight of Indy finally finishing what he started with this guy in World War II. It's going to be, oh, we have to get captured. And it's like, oh.
We have another half hour to go.
JH Edit says, every time Mads Mikkelsen was on screen, it was money, though. The first hotel scene with the waiter. Oh, you're right, the waiter. I forgot. That's the scene I was talking about. So the waiter scene is great because the waiter comes in, a black man, and he's coming in to deliver the food, and he just kind of starts, Voller starts questioning him about his heritage. And he's like, no, where your people come from? He's like, I was born around the corner of Yankee Stadium or whatever. And then he's like, are you enjoying your victory, being a servant in these people? And you could tell that the guy knows what he's talking about. Like, do you really enjoy being the victors or whatever, treating you as a second class, all that kind of stuff, even though he would treat him the same way, even worse. And you could tell he wants to fire back, but he's not going to because he doesn't want to get fired. And so for Voller to then say, oh, you didn't win, Hitler lost, again, doubling down on his disdain for Hitler specifically. So I thought he played that scene really well. Like, both those actors, I thought, did a great job. That was like my favorite.
Well, that's why you get Mads Mikkelsen. You take a bland character on the page and you elevate it, and he's very good at his job. Even when you bring him into the third Fantastic Beasts movie with what little prep time he had, he still stole the show.
Yeah. What'd you think of that scene, Tom? When the waiter comes in with the food and Mads is like,
Yeah, that took me by surprise. He goes, where you from? No, your people.
Yeah,
I'm like,
geez.
yeah, that's what I was like, Jesus Christ.
Oh my God, he must be a Nazi.
Exactly. He's not hiding it at all.
Jesus Christ, people. He's a
You don't
Nazi.
expect that question to be asked in Indiana Jones in an Indiana Jones movie, especially in that way. No, your people.
Well, right, because
Yeah.
that kind of goes. You're right though, because it goes back to what Spielberg said: is that after he made Schindler's List, he wouldn't make cartoonish, random. Like, yeah, they're evil because they have Nazi bands on them, but we never really got to see them do anything evil. Whereas this is kind of getting to the root of what a Nazi is by the way he's querying this guy, and that felt like really unsettling, like genuinely unsettling in the ways that the other villains were. All Nazi villains were fun and were cool and all that, like in terms of you love to hate them and stuff. But this was really like skin crawling scene that felt something closer to reality that Nazi would say,
Yeah, and if this movie would have been released by Paramount, that question would have gone a little bit further.
Right, that's true.
This is the clean version for everyone.
Yeah, because I saw the Paramount logo at the beginning of the movie, and it's like if Paramount had an affiliation with it, and you should have done the crossfade into the mountain or whatever, like they did with the other 4 movies. But it some of it did feel slightly sanitized, so I'm surprised Disney even let them go that far with it. But you're right, it would have been. J.H. Edit says, added weight to that line from earlier when Indy says to the Nazi on the train, to the victor go the spoils. Right, because that's another theme. It's like you enjoying your victory. We're the ones like, yeah, we get to keep all the treasure. The victor go the spoils. He's like, yeah, to the victor go the spoil. Which is why I wish that they had somehow incorporated the fact that he is the one who's, because for those who don't know, historically speaking, the Voller character is a very thinly veiled version of Werner von Braun, the Nazi rocket scientist in charge of the V-2 rocket program, who used slave labor up the yin-yang for his rocket program throughout the war. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, personally invited von Braun to join the SS, which he did as an honorary position, and he loved it. And then at the end of the war, as part of Operation Paperclip, the U.S. whitewashed his background, and like, oh, he only wore the uniform once, and he only accepted because he didn't have the luxury. He couldn't turn down Himmler, or he'd be shot. Oh, he only joined the Nazi party because otherwise they would shoot him if he didn't continue doing what he wanted. It's like bullshit. He was into it, and much like Hans Landa,
they had to do that or lose it to the Russians.
Right, and much like Hans Landa and Inglourious Basterds, von Braun was an opportunist. Just like, well, we lost the war, so I guess I'll go play for the winning side. And so
here, they might have lost it, but then he went, okay, I see where the mistake was. Now that I know how far I pushed the rockets, I'm going to take what I know, go back to which we're going to get to right now, go back to World War II and finish what I started.
Right, and J.H. Edit says he was going to destroy London with those rockets. Yes, that's what von Braun was going to do. That's why I mentioned earlier, if they'd gone the other route, had to be an Imperial Japanese villain, it would be the guy who wanted to destroy San Francisco and San Diego with plague bombs and stuff even after the Japanese government said no, because even the fanatics in the Japanese empire at the end of the war knew that they were going to lose and said no, it's a bad idea, because as much as they didn't want to surrender, they still didn't want to piss off the U.S. even more. But the guy was fanatical enough that he still wanted to do it. And it's like, again, but I digress. That would have been another thing where you bring your knowledge of bioweapons for 20 years working with the bioweapons division in the United States and take that back, trying to go back and use that again. It would have been a great excuse to bring back Short Round. But again, I digress.
And again, as I mentioned before, go watch Man in the High Castle and For All Mankind so you can see alternate history. You're going to like it.
Yeah, for sure. So
you know something. Yeah. I wanted to bring this up because you brought up how you saw the Paramount logo, and this is the first film. Actually, no, it's the third film that is a joint cooperation between Disney and Paramount, where they're credited together. The other 2 films were Popeye and Dragon Slayer. But if you want to talk about the dissolve, it wasn't with the Paramount logo. It was with the Lucasfilm logo, and it dissolves into a latch.
Right. It kind of cuts. It didn't dissolve. It was just a hard cut to the latch. It would have been nice to. Oh yeah. David says, I think they felt it was important to emphasize that Nazis are bad, which is sad, but probably necessary as little people know history. As little as people know history. Yeah, it's true.
Well, there's a reason that he says that. It's a reason that he brought that up, because some idiot, and I do mean idiot, went on I don't know. I guess they commented on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that and said, "Here's another Indiana Jones movie where they're punching out Nazis, and they don't explain why Nazis are bad, so they're just punching them anyways."
God.
Yeah, it's like what?
David says, and it foreshadows plan with his dislike of Hitler. Yeah, because in the beginning he's like insulting the Fuhrer openly in front of the colonel, and then like he says, "You didn't win, Hitler lost." So like when critics say he doesn't reveal his plan to later, I'm like, okay, maybe he doesn't reveal the specifics of what he's going to do, but you get the idea very early on of what this guy's all about. JH Edit says, I would have liked to have seen more of that explored in the D-Age Indy sequence. Yeah, I think that was also something that they wanted to keep more action heavy as like James Mangold said in that interview that I watched that Tom recommended, that he wanted it to feel like the transition from the original 3 to the newer ones. Or the older age. So I kind of get that. But that's where we finally get to our climax, where Indy has been brought aboard the plane with the rockets, and he's like, we're going back in time to August 20th, 1939. He mentions the address in Munich. I didn't catch it. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But I love what Indy's reaction. He's like, what kind of Nazi wants to go back in time and kill the Fuhrer? And he's like, one who wants to win the war. And I kind of my friend Cameron and I just laughed out loud because we thought that was great. This is a guy who recognizes just how much of a dumbass Hitler was. And he's going to go back and basically blow up Hitler.
He's actually a smart Nazi.
Yeah, he is. And I'm guessing the plan is to ditch the plane or land it somewhere, because contrary to popular belief, you would be surprised to learn that even something as a Nazi government wouldn't be able to scramble fighter jets in a situation like that as quickly as they would you would maybe think they could. So I could picture him being able to ditch the plane or crash somewhere. And my problem with it is, given his position in the Nazi Party in the prologue, what makes him think that if you kill Hitler, and I'm assuming other members of the Nazi high command would have been killed as well, because if Hitler goes, Himmler would have been the next guy to take charge. And he's a lunatic too. So I wasn't clear how exactly he was going to. I mean, you could tell with his uniform, he had it dressed up so that he looked more official than he was in the prologue. But I guess that's kind of one of those things where you just kind of write off that he planned it all out, and so we just kind of accept that his plan would work if he ended up there. But I did kind of like that idea.
It's kind of like the movie Eagle Eye. You remember Eagle Eye with the
I didn't see
AI
it.
compute. You've never seen Eagle Eye?
and Michelle Monaghan.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you kind of like destroy an entire sect of the president's cabinet of leaders, and who's going to be the next in line to take over as president. I think it's kind of like along those lines. It's kind of like implied that he has a plan to usurp the entire hierarchy of who's going to be next in line after the Fuhrer, and he would probably position himself as the next one. Yeah,
so as far as Indiana Jones villain plots go, I thought this one was pretty good, because he did put some thought into it. And it's like, yeah, that would be scary if he succeeded, because of the fact that he specifically, it's not, at first I thought he was going to go back to 1944 to ensure that Operation Valkyrie was a success and then renegotiate the terms, because von Stauffenberg, for those who don't know, was crazy enough to think that as long as they ended the war immediately and handed over the SS and ended the Holocaust, that they would be allowed to keep their territories and Nazi Germany would be allowed to remain as a state. No, that was not going to happen. So when he says he's going back 12 days before the war started, because you have that joke early in the movie too, when Indy's like, you should have stayed out of Poland. And I thought it was pretty funny. So I was wondering, like, maybe he's not going to start the war immediately, and he's going to reorganize, and because the conventional wisdom for those who talk about where everything went wrong for the Nazis is when Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union before finishing off Great Britain. And I disagree, because I'm like, even if you finish off Great Britain, they simply didn't have the manpower to take down the Soviet Union and hold all these territories. For those who don't know, all of the Allied equipment that was left behind at Dunkirk, the Nazis relied on that as their primary military branch to hold France. Like they didn't have, like 60% of the Nazi war machine was on horse-drawn carriages. It was insane. They don't talk about that as much, probably because a lot of scholars don't want to admit, particularly European ones, don't want to admit just how much they demilitarized with the League of Nations and how dumb they were to not take Woodrow Wilson's advice, which says, don't do this, it's a bad idea. And so they like to play up the idea, oh, they almost won the war. It's like, not really. So it would be interesting to hear what Voller's specifics are going to be, but I like that I think that's a pretty good villain plan for Indiana Jones movies. So that was kind of cool. Yeah, J.H. Edits says he was the most complex of the Indy villains for sure. True, because I mean, yeah, everybody says the Nazis are villains in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but really Belloc is more or less the main villain, and he's just, yeah, he's evil because he's willing to help the Nazis to get what he wants, but he's not too complicated. He's like, yeah, he's a charlatan or whatever. Molaram, yeah, I just want to take over the world, and Kalima, that kind of stuff, which I love. Walter Donovan made no sense at all because he seemed to think the Nazis were just going to let him keep the Grail in his own collection and keep drinking to his own health, whereas they wouldn't give it to Hitler. It's like, really? And then Falco's plan made no sense because, like, oh, she thinks the skulls are psychic, so they'll give me psychic powers to brainwash people over the radio wave. It's like, okay, but this actually had more of a logic to it in terms of the through line of what he was trying to do. David follows up saying, I assumed he would use his security clearance to get close. Didn't he say where 1939 he would be? Yes, he did. The address was 16 something in Munich, and I looked it up before we started, but I couldn't find information specifically on that. But I'm sure somebody that'll come out at some point later. Somebody will figure that out. Unfortunately, I do not have that information. But I loved how some critics, by the way, we should make it clear that there are some critics out there who are very wrong when they say that, oh, Indiana Jones's plot at the end of the movie is he has to save Hitler. It's like, no, he's a prisoner aboard He's a prisoner aboard the airplane. He's trying to discourage him from going back in time, not because, yes, Indy would think this is a scary idea, but it's more so because he's like, you took continental drift into account, right? And Voller's like, yeah. He's like, well, Archimedes wouldn't have because he would have no way of knowing about continental drift. And I like how Voller actually considers it and actually towards the end gets kind of afraid that, oh my God, Indy might be right. And then as J.H. Edits, you have that great line from Indy when he says, I don't know where we're going, but it sure as hell ain't 1939.
And then look out there, and he's like, "Oh, we're back. We're in. It's 1939. We're in Sicily, 1930." And you look out there, and you see boats, and you see arrows and stuff,
and scorpions.
At what point do you think that's World War II?
Right, and so that was I love that too because he's trying to pull out right before they go through the portal, and when they go through, they seem to lose power initially because they have to restart the engines, and we see that the kid is following behind in another plane, and they made sure to have the pilot sleep in the plane so it's not too egregious because that pilot eventually takes over. But I was really down with this sequence because, again, to Ernesto's point, if you're going to go for it and be teasing it the whole time, you got to go there, and I was pleased, as I mentioned earlier, that it didn't get as crazy as what I thought was going to happen. I thought Indy was going to try and break free and fight him for the dial, and they were going to end up switching the thing around, and it was going to take them through like portals to all sorts of different moments in history. And that's what I was afraid of, because I'm like, no, it's going to be too cartoonish.
Multiverse of madness moment.
Right, I was afraid that was going to happen, and instead it doesn't. It goes back to the Siege of Syracuse, which again they teased that at the beginning, so that was cool. I thought that was a really kind of fun action sequence and kind of thrilling. I love that they're all thinking that it's a dragon and they're trying to shoot it down, and Indy cuts himself loose, and he's about to fight the villains, but when Helena shows up and opens the bomb bay doors and falls through it herself, he decides that I'm not gonna be a dick like she's been to me this whole time. I'm gonna save her, leave those guys to die on the airplane, because by now the plane has suffered fatal injuries. And so as they're preparing to bail out, Voller tries to steal his parachute, and she shoots him, not mortally wounds him, but she shoots him like in the leg or something, and he stumbles back into the cockpit. And I love how he says, I can't stay here.
I can't stay here. I have to go back.
I have to go back as they're, fighting through it. So that was really funny. I like that I'm surprised that when you see Archimedes, I'm like, oh shit, it's Archimedes. And he's actually there, and you see that he's building the dial, and they don't cut to it explicitly, but if you look closely when the camera's panning through his office, you see that the dial isn't complete yet. And for those who don't know, the siege went on for 2 years. It was being defended by inventions that Archimedes came up with. And the Roman general
explained in the beginning.
Yeah, and the Roman general in charge of the siege gave explicit orders not to kill Archimedes because he knew how much of a genius he was and was convinced that he could turn him to his side, which he likely would have. But a Roman soldier, we never found out the exact reason as to why, but he killed him. and the Roman general was furious that Archimedes was killed. And so the fact that he's building the dial during the climax, I'm like, ooh, that's kind of interesting, because I knew that history. They didn't mention the part about him dying in that siege. Like, I wonder what he's building this right now for, when all this chaos is going on right outside. And that's when you have a bit after the revelation that he built this thing specifically to get help. And that even though, which seems to contradict the continental drift thing, because it's like, yeah, if it was capable of going anywhere in time, then continental drift would be an issue you'd have to take into effect. But if it's designed specifically to only go back to that place in time, because that can't be a coincidence that the place they go back to is the same exact place that it was invented from, right? So it's like, so I guess the continental drift thing doesn't matter. I mean, it makes sense that Indy would raise that point and Voller would be afraid of it and try and back out. But then, because Helena did that trick with the cards in the boat, and he's like, "How did you know it was going to be a card?" She's like, "Well, because I stacked the deck," and she didn't. And he's like, "They're all the same card." She's like, "No, it's not." And she shows him, and she explains how she did the trick. And that comes back in the ending, because that's what the dial is basically doing. It's like a stacked deck. You're going to come back here no matter what, because he made this thing to basically save them. And we see that he retrieves Voller's watch. And you see Voller's totally charred corpse on the ground, which I kind of liked. And then student finds the dial. So he realizes that, oh, it worked. And yeah, I totally understand why people felt this jumps the shark too much. Because the other movies like to allude to the history and see some of the supernaturals, whereas this, you're actually going there, and it's like what Belloc said in the first movie, this is history, and now Indy's actually there. And the look on his face after they've bailed out of the plane and he's sitting on the beach just watching like this amazing stuff going on, and you could totally buy that he feels the way that he does. But I totally get simultaneously why Archimedes running up to him and them talking to him is an issue, even though, granted, to be fair, he does talk to the Grail Knight in The Last Crusade. But I was really on board. What do you guys think? I was on board with this climax. It's like, yes, go for it.
Yeah.
If you're going to go for it, do it.
Yeah, and he goes, "You were meant to come here. You're supposed to be here. This was made for you." But what it really showed me is when you see the watch in the coffin, it was like, oh, I originally thought, I thought he came to the future, but then I thought it wasn't Archimedes in the
In the sarcophagus.
I thought it was Mads Mikkelsen. I thought that he had stayed in the past and that they buried him in there, and that was him. So
right, that would be how he killed the villain, yeah.
And I thought they killed the villain and that they put him in there. And I was totally thrown off that that's what they were going to end up. But I like the fact that they didn't end up going back to Germany. And that would have been. I liked that was a great bait and switch, I
mean, it would have still worked because they already set it up in the beginning. So
that's true, but
even if they would have gone back up, well, you already set it up. We might as well finish what we started.
Yeah, but in that instance, it's like, I mean, you got to top the original sequence if you're going back to Germany.
I know. I'm just saying it would have been fine if it was Germany again.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, it would fill in as well, and Indy having to
And it's not like the critics say Indy trying to save Hitler. No, I don't think he's trying to save Hitler. I think he's trying to keep history intact because, say what you will, Hitler has to win. This whole thing of people going back in time to shoot Hitler in the crib. No, Hitler has to win.
Well, he loses, but he has to. Yeah, he has to.
He has to get to that point. He has to get to that point. He can't not exist.
Yeah, it's funny because I was talking about this with a friend after we saw The Flash, and he's like, well, if you could go back in time and do all this, would you change anything? And he says, well, and I told him, well, it's kind of like that age-old argument. Would you go back and kill Hitler? And I said, well, no, because, as many people that died in World War II, 60 million in total, I think roughly 40 million or so specifically, or 45 or 50 specifically from the European theater. Tens upon millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people have been born now directly, specifically because of World War II. You would be causing a much greater genocide by going back and preventing that from happening, as horrific as it was, by doing that, which is why I said I wouldn't do that. Now, I know that Indy becomes a bit of a hypocrite, seemingly, because when Helena's trying to say you can't stay here, you're gonna die, and he's like, you're gonna change history and create a paradox. He's like, well, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. And I think that's more him being shocked that he's actually, because it's one thing to study this stuff and to acknowledge that you can't interfere with messing with the timeline. It's another thing to actually go back there and actually see it. And it's like,
he's also in shock. He's just been shot. He has
yeah, he's in shock. He's bleeding out. Yeah,
Jay. That's how I'm choosing to look at it, and it might be an execution issue, but that's how I'm going to choose to look at it. That he's been shot. He doesn't know what's up from down, and he's still in his depressive state. But that's another conversation for another time.
J.H. Edit says it's not Syracuse to New York as mentioned in the class. Right, they're teased that much earlier. He follows up saying Indy may have just been messing with Voller's head a bit with continental drift. No, I think he didn't know at the time that device was rigged to specifically go back to that time period. I think it was simply that I think he was genuinely worried about that they're going to end up somewhere else, and then he got surprised when they ended up there. And I noticed that also on that theme for a bit, they kept making a point that the device isn't supernatural, that it's just mathematics. Like at one point when Basil is when he's all delusional, and he's making the point that, oh, he can detect fissures in time, and Indy says something like, well, it's not just a theory. If it's facts, then that's called science. He kind of hits that point home that, like, even Voller says at one point, this isn't supernatural like the sphere. This is mathematics. And it's like, okay, but it's still designed in it's like Archimedes saw that portal and he specifically designed it to get access to that one. And so I thought that was kind of interesting how they were trying to double down on the idea that this is more of a grounded object. Like there's a pre-existing time vortex and he managed to discover, which is a little hokey, but I get what they were trying to say.
Yeah. Also, there's nothing wrong with it being supernatural either.
Yeah. David says, I felt Indy wanting to stay was super out of character. Yeah, no, but
they were what Mads wanted. He wanted to go back into 1939 and stay there, take over what Hitler was doing, kill Hitler, take over for him, and change history. But Indy wanted to stay and watch the history and be and live it. And because she told him, no, you can't do this, he was caught up in the situation and just it was what he's always wanted to see. And she had to smack him into reality going, no, you can't do this. No, I'll be fine. No, you can't do this. And then she goes, I'm sorry. And,
remember she finally gave a shit.
Well, I think the reason the reason she gives a shit is because once she sees, because they were teasing that, like he says, you don't memorize 8 books just for selling stuff for money. And then when she sees that the bird on the sarcophagus had propellers and this guy had a 60s watch on him in the tomb, she realizes, oh shit, this thing's actually real. And that kind of rekindles her own kind of interest in it, especially when they go back and see the things that they've seen. Whereas Indy, to your point, Ernesto, he's in shock because he's been shot. And even though it's a wound that he could be saved from in his time, he would die back here. So it's not like he's going to be saved and he's going to hang out and change history. He's literally going to die on the beach. And I think he knows that, which is why he wants to stay there.
To the chest so he can survive a bullet.
Yeah, well, he's sitting there, and I think that whole thing is that it's, again, playing on the idea that he feels irrelevant in 1969, because the whole reason, like, remember when Voller took him on the airplane in the end, which I thought, why are you taking him on the airplane? Just leave him behind. But he says, don't you want to go back to a place like where men like us mattered? Like, he seems to have some type of a genuine appreciation for Indy, even though he's obviously against him. And it's like, okay, I get what you're saying, but the reason Voller is irrelevant is for completely different reasons than the reason Indy feels he's irrelevant. And so Indy does feel irrelevant and doesn't want to go back. And she's trying to talk him into going back. And it's like, well, the siege is going to go on for the full 2 years. And even if you don't live that long, you're not going to survive the end of the siege. They're going to kill you.
Yeah, but I still think, and again, I'm glad that they capitalized on it, but they are dropping lines about you can't change history and everything. I'm pretty sure everything that just happened up until this point should have changed history, but we're just going to ignore it just to end it cleanly. But okay.
Right, because Daniel says, I was worried they would ruin history, but then I heard it was retrocausal. It always happened that way. Retrocausal is when events from the future affect the past. It was always like that.
I
He says,
love that every time anything that time travel happens, people treat it like it's fact. Jesus Christ.
he says, remember when they went to the grave of Archimedes and he was wearing a watch from '69, and I think the same watch. Well, the propellers were etched. So, yeah, so that's again saying that it's like fate that it's going to happen, even though they haven't actually traveled back in time yet. And J.H. Edits says, I thought maybe Indy figured it out when he saw the Nazi watch. Right. Did he figure? Because I'm not sure if he identified it as the Nazi watch, but he did figure out that this device was real and it does what it's purported to do when he sees the watch. But I don't think he necessarily knew that meant. I interpreted it as him looking at that, and I thought he believed initially that Archimedes had used it as opposed to them being about to. Because if he knew from looking at that they were about to use it, then he would know that, oh, well, obviously Voller failed because we're not living in Nazi, in the 1,000-year Reich.
Yeah, but you can also interpret it as, oh, maybe he visited our world at some point and took.
Yeah. That's what I thought Indy was thinking
which would explain why Archimedes was so invested in following the plane crash, and he's not questioning anything that's happening.
Right, and that's why. Yes, that's what I agree. That's what I think Indy thought as well. And J.H. Edit says Indy felt he had nothing to go back to as well. His son and his wife are both gone. Yeah, and you can tell he's a bit in shock when he's talking about it. I did not like, however, that the sequence ends with him like a cut to black of him getting punched in the face. I feel that's like not so much a reshoot. I feel that there was something else that was going to happen that they may have changed.
Oh yeah, they did change something. That's why the budget was as big as it was. They reshot that ending multiple times. What the original ending was, we will never know until somebody reveals it. I like the sequence, but again, it kind of goes back to, okay, there still should be some history changing here, because that is, like, on the one hand, I'm thinking, okay, the term dragon is part of the Latin phrase from Draco, which I know was in Greeks that there were serpents and everything. But you look at that thing, I'm just like, okay, if in your history you know what a flying serpent is, you look at that, that's the first thing in your mind, dragon. Okay, that's fine. I'll roll along with it. And I like how all of a sudden everybody just starts shooting at the boats, and I'm like, why are you shooting?
I was laughing. I got such a big laugh out of that when Kleber opens the window and he's got the big machine gun. He's just firing
it. I'm looking at him, it's like, you're probably going to shoot someone who should still be alive after this war. Stop it.
Well, he's not. He's too stupid to think about that.
I know. I'm just like, man, history's already changing just by you doing that. What are you doing, man?
I thought it was funny in terms of just the futility of it. It's like, dude, the plane's going down. You're flying way too fast. You're just shooting out the window. It's like, what are you doing? But we get that it didn't end up affecting history because, again, it's going with that retro-causal thing where it already happened. It's fated to happen. And I guess that the plane gets burned to a crisp or torn to pieces or whatever, and they never find out what it was, I guess. But then, so she takes the dial back from Archimedes. They get in the plane and travel back through the portal to 69. The dial, I noticed, is still sitting next to Indy, which I assume now he's going to have to destroy it or something. Like, he can't, now that he knows that it's only designed to go back to that specific moment in time, he can't change history that way, especially now that he's not in shock anymore and he's kind of back. So yeah, I would assume that's going to get destroyed or whatever's going to happen to it. And
it'll be a paperweight.
Yeah, so then we have, Sala doing singing the song. They all take going out for ice cream as a callback to when the kid wanted to get ice cream, and they're all singing the song. They all scream for ice cream as they're leaving. And the fact that Marion, again, is not bothered by, like, she seems normal, goes to show that actually it was Indy, the one whose life got ruined by his son dying, not her. But again, I wish she kind of felt more of that early in the film. And so, again, I'm not crazy about them just recycling a scene from Raiders rather than making a new one to end the movie on. Because, again, that's almost like you're saying, remember this other movie that was really great? We want you to remember that, as opposed to making this feel like its own worthy entry in the series. But overall, I'm realistic about the fact that, again, you're making a sequel like 35 years after the last good one. He's 80 years old. So, I mean, I still had fun with the movie. I mean, it was not as bad. It wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be. But yeah, I liked it. What did you guys think of the final ending back at the apartment and all that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you recognize Karen Allen when you saw her?
At first, no. I had to kind of, like, cocked my head for a second. I'm like, wait, is that? It's like, oh, it is.
Because there were someone, I don't know who put it out there. They were like, Karen Allen, 71, unrecognizable in new Indiana Jones film. I'm like,
That's just
well, let's see. If the movie
And for
takes place in 1969, her character would be older. Why? What's hard to believe?
No, I don't think they mean. No, I think they mean unrecognizable in the sense that they literally didn't initially recognize her when she walks in the door. Like I knew it was Marion because they started playing the music, but I did kind of skip for a second because she looked like. Obviously, you're going to be older because it's been 14 years since they had filmed Crystal Skull. But for a minute, I did initially not recognize her. I'm like, oh, of course, it's Marion. And I do like that moment earlier in the movie in the prologue when Indy finds his hat and his whip and his coat on the train, and you see the picture of Marion that fell out of the bag on the gold train. So he still was carrying that with him even in 1944, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah,
And so,
but that happens when you're not in the limelight for that long either.
yeah.
Nobody says that Harrison Ford is unrecognizable. No, he's just old.
Well, yeah, he's been around in a bunch of movies and all that.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's the point I'm making.
right. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
People are just being dicks because she's aged.
JH Edit says, I love hearing Solace singing that song again. People in my theater were singing along.
Or theater.
I didn't have anybody doing that in my theater.
No, either.
Yeah, Daniel says, so the Romans and the Greeks saw the plane as a dragon. Yeah, they called it a dragon. I agree with Ernesto that, okay.
Yeah, because my point is, in their time, they know what a flying serpent is. Like, we're under let's assume for a moment that in this universe, the Greek gods exist, the trials of Hercules exist. Okay, let's believe that exists. You know what a flying serpent is like. That is not a flying serpent, okay? At least not what you've seen. So, but we'll go with dragons because it makes sense for them to call it a dragon, even though it's not breathing fire. But okay.
Yeah. And so with the movie ending on him snatching the hat, again, I don't think that's indicative of them making another movie because Harrison has been very clear that he is absolutely done with it. And given the box office for this movie, they're definitely not making a sequel, at least not for a long time, unless they reboot it down the line. But I had fun with it. I certainly was more invested for a lot of the scenes because a lot of times in Crystal Skull, it felt like, okay, we're seeing him do Indiana Jones stuff, like go to the graveyard, investigate the tomb, go to the psychiatric, look at that. But I wasn't feeling as much urgency in that plot, even after the whole big action, the chase sequence through the jungle and the big ants and all that. After that, the movie, it's like I like some of the lore and what we're seeing, but it never felt like it picked up speed again. It's like they're just kind of walking along, kind of like, in that Pirates of the Caribbean movie, recycled the Raiders plot where they're all going after the Fountain of Youth, but it just feels like everybody's just kind of walking along leisurely. It doesn't feel like there's, this movie, I felt there was more pace and bravado and speed to it, and I was kind of into it more. Even though I admit that Crystal Skull does feel like a bit more of a classic indie tropes being in there. So it's kind of a mixed bag with Crystal Skull, but I did enjoy the movie, I think, a bit more than the last one on the whole. JH Edit says, my theater was hyped, lots of cosplayers. Oh, wow. Daniel says, they could have done more with the time travel. Remember when Indy said he'd go back in time and tell Mutt not to enlist and he would die? They could have done. Well, yeah, he might do. That's a good question. Would he do that with the dial? Maybe not, because, technically there's nothing stopping him from doing it. But given that the movie validated the causal time paradox thing, his son would be there if he actually did that. So
he probably wouldn't stop him, but he would want to see his son one more time.
Yeah, he might. So that's it's true because there are actually ways they can
about letting. Because his thing is about things need to play out the way they do because it's history, and I think at that point, even if he does come across his son, he would probably be like, you know what? Just seeing him one more time, knowing what's going to happen, just tell him, "Hey, kid, be careful," and leave it at that.
Right, because when they leave the past and go back to the future, they only take back what they brought with them. they leave in the other plane and they take the completed dial with them. But he did. Well, actually, he does take the busted one of the busted scorpions with him, but that's an inanimate object, so it's not going to do anything. But I don't know what would happen if you tried to say take Archimedes out of there to the future. Like, would it work? I don't know. So, point being, could he go back and actually stop his son in enlisting by? Well, then again, actually, I just remembered he can't because it's only capable of going back to that time, the siege of Syracuse.
Right.
It wouldn't. But even if it did, again, he wouldn't stop his son from enlisting. He would just want to see him before he leaves.
Yeah.
Because-
Edits, why did Mutt enlist? Indy says it was to piss him off. So apparently their relationship soured. Daniel's Hot Topic says he takes a busted scorpion. Yeah, well, scorpion, I'm not talking about the bug. I'm talking about
The arrow.
the giant arrows that get shot into the plane that Indy uses to cut the ropes. Those are called scorpions, and they're really cool.
I think we've reached a point where people really do need to know their history.
Yeah, and so he takes the broken piece of and so you see that sitting on the side table. He kept the giant arrowhead from the scorpion with him, and so yeah. But you're right. As we think about it, of course, he can't go back to there because the device is only rigged to go back to the siege of Syracuse. And so I guess Indy, now that he's not in shock anymore, he's not going to abuse that aspect of history. So, yeah. I liked it. What do you? So what do we think on the whole?
I do it a 9.1.
You what?
9.1.
Okay, Ernesto.
Well, I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it, and I'll probably just do the opposite of what you did, Catherine. I had more fun with Crystal Skull than I did here. This wasn't fun. There were some moments that I liked. I didn't feel the fun that I felt 15 years ago, unfortunately. But you know what? They could have done worse. This could have been a complete train wreck, and it wasn't. And there are some good moments, and I like that they actually committed to the third act, as anticlimactic as it was. And I may soften on the Fleabag character down the road, but as it stands, it's a really big detriment to the movie. She's just not likable, and the finality of it is just trying to make up for her flaws, but it's too late by that point. So if I were to rate it, if I recall, I think I gave Crystal Skull a 7.5. I'll give this one a 6 bullwhips out of 10.
You and I both gave Crystal Skull a 7.
Oh, a 7? Then this will be a 6 then.
All right. I'll give this. I initially gave it 4 out of 5 of my initial jubilation of leaving the theater, but then thinking about it, which would be a solid B, I'm going to give it 7.5, which I think is going to be more accurate for me because, again, it is too long. There is CGI or too much. It's too much CGI at times. And while I like the climax, it's not as great as your opening sequence, and that's a problem. You can't do that. But I still enjoyed it. I thought it was obviously not. It easily could have been a better movie, but I do feel it's. And again, given that I didn't think in a million years they would ever end up making Indy 5, despite being aware of the production hell it was going through, the fact that they actually made it, I'm not as knocking on it as much as being the final Indy, because it's almost like something that they forced out at the last second. Given to Tom's point, James Mangold says, well, I need another year if you want me to make this work, and having to restructure it, do a bottom-down rewrite or whatever. So I liked it. So I'm not going to hate on it. I'm not going to, I didn't hate on Crystal Skull when it came out as much, but I admit I had no anticipation for this movie. I should have.
Oh, how the tides have turned.
Yeah, like 7 months ago, I was excited when I saw the first trailer and I read that initial premise, but for some reason, going into the movie, especially after all the reviews came out at Cannes, it kind of killed a lot of my. It was a buzzkill, and I think that the reason Crystal Skull didn't suffer as much from, because they debuted at Cannes Festival as well. The difference was the movie came out a week after it. It came out a week to the released to the public 1 week after it was released at Cannes. So the people didn't have time to stew on that, and it made like $750 million or whatever. But this people have been stewing on it for like a month already, and now that he's 80, it's like. I remember when we were all talking about how are you going to sell a 65-year-old indie to people. Well, now it's like 80, so it's a bit harder. Yeah. So Daniel says he takes a busted scorpion with him. Yeah, he did. You watch the movie again.
You already answered that one.
That's right, I did answer that one. Yeah, but it's sitting on the. David says, I was concerned when we saw Marion that he had changed history. Right, because she comes through the door and she's not at all the broken person that he described, which is why initially it kind of caught me off guard. And then, but then he didn't change history.
I don't think he ever said that she was broken. It's just that their lives was broken after Mutt died.
Yeah, well, he said. I remember. Well, he did say that she in particular was inconsolable, and that's why it kind of.
Well, her kid died. Of course.
I know. I get that 100%. I'm just saying that he seemed like a much more grumpy, depressed person, whereas I didn't get what happened. Yeah, like what caused her to suddenly show up and be just normal and act like nothing was wrong. So, because it's like obviously just because she finds out he went on another adventure isn't a reason really for her to think that everything's going to be fine. So. I agree with David. Initially, I thought that's why I initially didn't recognize her because it's like, well, she wouldn't be. He didn't describe her this way, but then it's like, oh, it is her. It's like, did he change something?
How many other? What other older woman's gonna walk in there if it's not Marin?
Well, I said initially I didn't recognize her because I didn't recognize it as Karen Allen. But then when I did, I thought, is Mutt gonna walk in behind her? Is that why she's acting so normal, almost like this broken relationship never happened? So yeah, but then it didn't. They didn't change history. So
well, Salah said, "Have you tried calling Marion?" And Indy said she doesn't want to talk to me.
Right.
She wants nothing to do with me. She doesn't want to talk to me.
Daniel says, "Are you sure they took the spear with them or dislodged?" Yes, I'm positive. It's sitting on the bedside table, the nightstand. Yeah. When the camera's panning into his room, you see it sitting right there, the light shining on it from the open window.
Maybe they got shot on their way out.
JH Edit says, I love a good adventure, but I like this one tries to explore a bit of the deeper subject matter. I'm rolling with a solid 9. He says, Crystal Skull also had the advent of being a Spielberg film as well. That's true. And he also says, I thought maybe Helena and Sala had a lot to do with that. Yeah, getting Marion to come back, probably. Then again, it would have been neat. Yeah, for whatever that scene, whatever they would have told her. But yeah, I like that he does end up with Marion. I initially had heard that the reason Marion might not be in the movie at all was that he divorced her, and I was initially really upset about that. It's like, look, I get that people didn't like the 4th movie. That doesn't mean you have to pretend it didn't happen, you know? So I like that they do bring them back together.
They killed Mutt, so somebody didn't like something about that movie.
Yeah, well, they said the only reason that Mutt wasn't in the film is because of how the reaction to him and Shia LaBeouf being in the film.
Okay,
so he will not be appearing in the film.
Okay,
right, but
well, this is what they decided to do to not have him in the film.
But it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Somehow recasting is foreign to Hollywood these days.
Yeah, David.
Because Mutt wasn't the issue.
Right,
the actor might have been the issue, just not the character.
David says, oh, I was concerned we were going to see Mutt right behind her. Right, that's kind of what I thought initially, too, because she comes through the door and like as if nothing's wrong, as if they haven't even been separated. I'm like, what? I just went to the grocery store. I'm like, did he change something, you know?
Also, you would call Marion if your soon-to-be ex-husband gets shot, so there's still love there.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's why she says you're still wearing your wedding band.
Well, David, tell us, what do you give it out of 10 bullwhips? And you could give it half bullwhips as well, so chime in and tell us.
David will probably give it a...
Yeah, I had that thought, too, about Mutt showing up as well. I was like, I wonder,
I wasn't thinking that at all.
I only thought it for a second, and then it's like, no, that's not what's going on.
Before Christ doesn't mean Mutt's going to survive. No.
Yeah.
Ancient Greece ain't that powerful.
I suppose they can have a CGI Mutt appear. No. It goes back to where Ernesto said.
Have you learned nothing?
Yeah. They even made a fourth wall breaking joke in Iron Man 2 when Don Cheadle shows up in the Terrence Howard role, and he's like, look, I'm here, let's deal with it and move on. You know, it's like Hollywood can do that, but they and frankly, I get why Spielberg soured on Shia back then. And I think Shia even owned up to it 2 years later. He's like, yeah, I should have listened to Steven, but I don't think if he even came back for a cameo that anybody would have been opposed to that.
No, we would have been fine with it.
Yeah, I don't think Steven would have cared. It was 15 years ago. It's over with, you know?
Despite everything that's happened since then, despite the stuff that he's had in his personal life, a cameo can go a long way because, again, I don't see Mud and think about what Shia does. I see Mud and think about, oh, that's Indy's kid. So him showing up in some capacity, just like, hey, that's your son. I'm not thinking about his personal life.
Right, exactly. So, but I do also agree with Tom that it would have been great. And even though she didn't ask her that on the boat at the end of the movie, it would have been great for him to ask her when he comes back in the room. Now that they realize that they can't use the dial to go wherever they want, maybe then he can ask her, where would you go, or where would you have gone if you could have? And I think maybe she would have answered it then, because you're right, Tom. That does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity and like a missing piece there. So, David chimed in. He says, I think on.
Oh, so I called it an 8.
Yep, an 8 to 8.5. So that's where he's at. Cool. Yeah,
Yes,
for you guys, David's actually my co-host on the Star Wars show Unifying Force. Good friend. So yeah, and thanks for watching. He's here.
I'll probably close my thoughts on this. It's funny because yesterday, this morning, because over the weekend, as I turned 32, and
happy birthday.
Thank you. I decided to finally watch because Netflix finally got the final season of Better Call Saul. And I've been wanting to see that final season for a long time, avoiding all the spoilers. And we get to the last episode. And there's an episode, spoilers to anybody who hasn't watched this, I apologize in advance. There's a scene where we go back to the Breaking Bad days where Saul is with Walter White and they're stuck in this room trying to get their new identities. And Saul asked him the same thing. If you had an ability to make a time machine, where would you do and where would you go? And Walter White has an entire monologue saying, what is it with people going back in time? You have regrets. That's all you do. The only reason why people ask about having a time machine is because they have regrets and they want to change something. And then going back to her never answering it, if they wanted to go back to that topic, it would have been fun for her to be like, you know what? You can't change the past. We all have regrets, but it doesn't have to define our future. So let's go there. That would have been nice.
Well, it's kind of what Bruce Wayne says in The Flash. Minor spoilers. He says, Barry, our scars make us who we are. That's why I'm not going to let you go back to save my parents even.
Yeah. And also but it's a meta comment on how tired we are of this time travel trope. And we've had them 4 times now in a span of 4 weeks.
That's right. We had it with Indiana Jones. We had it with The Flash, and then Across the Spider-Verse.
Exactly.
I must be the only person that doesn't mind the time travel thing.
Well, I admit I kind of was bugged that when I was seeing The Flash, and minor spoilers for The Flash, when Michael Keaton's Batman is explaining how the multiverse works, and I'm like, that's funny. A few weeks ago, I heard Oscar Isaac's character, Miguel, say the exact same thing in Across the Spider-Verse.
Yes, because the same people who worked on Across the Spider-Verse worked initially on The Flash, and they took their ideas and took it to the Spider-Verse movies. And at no point did anybody say, you can't do that. That's intellectual property. Get the fuck over here. What are you doing with our shit?
JH Edit says it's a compliment to the movie that I've thought a lot about it every day since I've seen it. I see a lot of movies. Most of them I'm still not thinking about it 2 days later. Right, so you're still thinking about it, so that's good. And as David says, enjoyable but some issues, but a really nice place to end up. Yeah, okay, so I can see people are going to be like around, but overall I think it's going to be a divisive movie, but I think it might age a little better. Kind of like I've been seeing these revisionist reviews lately from people having now seen before Dial of Destiny came out, they were going back and doing the reviews like we were doing, and they were still trashing Crystal Skull. Well, now that they've seen Dial of Destiny, they're doubling back and backpedaling like, no, Crystal Skull is better. It's like, you just spent last week trashing this movie, and now you're trying to backpedal and say,
"What does that sound a lot like?"
Yeah.
What does that sound a lot like? It sounds a lot like people who didn't like Rise of Skywalker, and then didn't like The Last Jedi, and then saw Rise of Skywalker, and went, "Oh, Last Jedi is a great movie. Rise of Skywalker sucks." No. You don't go and change it just because you didn't like one movie, and you see the second one that comes after it and go, you know what, this one was a lot better than this one. You can't do that. You can't revisit it.
J.H. Edit says, I love how in Flash it all comes down to spaghetti tomato. Yeah, it does. We're not going to get into that because this isn't a Flash video.
Yeah,
But
stop bringing up the Flash movie. Jesus fucking Christ. 4 weeks of this shit with the Flash in all of our Indiana Jones reviews. God damn it, people. No,
I
it's
got
true.
the Flash on pre-order, my friend.
Go back to our reviews of Indiana Jones, and every single comment is about the Flash.
Oh,
And
God,
when we do the Flash, it's all going to be about Indiana Jones.
Oh my fucking God, people with the Flash. I mean, hey, if you liked it, that's great, but stick to the topic, my man.
Yeah, Jay Jedid says laugh out loud. Even he finds that funny, but he's the one who brought it up. Actually, Daniel brought it up earlier with the box office, but yeah.
Oh, Daniel, you adorable bastard. Jesus Christ.
Well, Jay Jedid is the one who brought up the latest one, but yeah, that's funny.
Oh, man.
So yes, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Not the dumpster fire I feared it was going to be, but not
No.
great. But I still thoroughly enjoyed it just because of the surreal feeling that it's like, wow, this is the last time I'm going to be seeing an Indiana Jones movie for the first time.
Man, I wish it would have been called another title and not this young adult novel kind of title, Dial of Destiny. It's like I was expecting Artemis Fowl to show up at some point. Maybe the Dial of Orichalcum would have had a better name than this movie.
Yeah.
Didn't they ever talk about doing an Atlantis adventure in any of the Indiana Jones stories?
Yes, I think at one point there was a script for one. I think.
Yeah, that's what.
Then they used it for the plot of one of the video games, didn't they? Yeah. J.H. Edit says at least we're not talking about Inspector Gadget.
Hey, don't tempt me.
Yeah.
Don't tempt me.
Oh man! Well, this has been our longest episode of Idle Snakes and Skulls.
Match the timeline of this movie.
And we will still be having another such video in which Scotty and I are going to discuss it. He went to see it with his dad. My dad. I went to see it with.
I don't think Scotty is stuck in the museum. I think he actually went back in time and he was used as a model for Da Vinci's Mona Lisa.
You know what? Actually, the amount of time we spent talking about the movie, we could have saw the movie again. We just talked the entire length of we could have done an audio commentary.
Oh, yeah. God. You know what? We would be very good at Mystery Science Theater at this point.
Oh, yes. It would be great. But yeah, I saw it with my parents and my friend Cameron. And Cameron, my mom, and I really liked it. My dad didn't like it. He thought, too much CGI, too many chase sequences. And for some reason, he was having a problem with all of the suspension of disbelief. To which point we brought up the things in the last movie and other movies before. But yeah, I do. So I actually read an interesting comment today when people were talking about why the box office is so low, and he says, "Well, think about it. The core Indiana Jones audience who grew up with the movies don't like the whole CGI stuff." And young kids are not going to thrill to the adventures of an 80-year-old guy talking about archaeology and training and stuff like that. So it's like, well, who is this movie made for? And I thought that's a really interesting way of putting it because while I find I'm kind of in the middle, I mean, I agree with the avoid the CGI at all costs. And I disagree with the idea that I'm not interested in Indy just because he's older. But I thought that's a good point that they probably didn't ask themselves before they made the movie in terms of especially after James Mangold made a whole big point that, it won't be as CG as Crystal Skull, but then it is. And part of that, I get it, because he's 80 and you can't put him in some of those dangerous action sequences like you could back in, like I believe he actually did that stunt in Crystal Skull where he's hanging off the back of the motorcycle driving down the street in Connecticut. Yeah. He did that. Yeah, but he's not doing that stuff now.
He was young. He was at least young enough to be able to still do something like that. Whereas here, it's like, bro, if I sneeze, you're gonna get bruised.
Yeah. J.H. says they could have come across a Greek sculpture of Indy to end it all. Oh yeah, like they Archimedes sees them and makes it. But again, that's the issue of remember the siege at the end of this.
Oh, you know what?
They're all gonna die.
I would actually buy that as an ending. You can cut back to the era of Dionysus and you go deeper into the cave, and at the end, something happens, and then you see this light piercing through one of the mirrors that Archimedes used, and it's a statue of Indiana Jones that's never going to be discovered.
Well, another thing I heard was people speculated, what if the body in the tomb is actually Indiana Jones? with a watch and half the dial. Like he dies.
No, I would have hated that. I would have hated that so much.
Yeah. But that was another idea I heard.
This is the only Indiana Jones film not to be shot on actual film. This was done digitally, the film.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
you can tell. You can tell.
Yeah, I could tell, but like Crystal Skull was polished, but I think they shot that on film.
Yeah.
It's
not that.
My dad made a joke about the time travel sequence where, if this would have been Spielberg, that would have been a dinosaur in this movie. I'm like, yes, there would have.
Dinosaur.
There would have, especially when you consider Ready Player One. He brought his T-Rex from Universal to that movie. So damn right there would have been a T-Rex in this movie.
T-Rex.
And it would have been a callback to Iron Skies, where in the third movie there are Nazis in the middle of at the core of the earth with dinosaurs.
You see, I thought that's what they were going for when they said that Voller was specifically going to use his position in the moon landing program, using it for his own ends. And it's like, what are they going to do? Nazis on the moon? I was afraid of that for a while.
I mean, considering the space race, there could be an argument for Nazis.
Right, because they kept playing that up in the initial press releases that it was about all those things, and then the movie didn't really have anything to do with that. So
would it have been so far-fetched? No, it would have been fine.
No, it's true.
But as long as there's no like flying saucer coming out of the surface of the moon with the swastika on the bottom, then we'll be fine.
Oh yeah, David says like the painting in Ghostbusters 2.
Hard talking about.
Yeah. But okay, I think we've talked this to death.
Have we though? Have we?
Well, Scotty and I certainly will, because we're going to do a spoiler discussion at some point in the future.
So he's going to pop his head out of it. So okay.
Well, at least we didn't have him tonight. We're going to do the non-spoiler part. Let me get you to the spoiler.
Yeah, exactly. He was excited.
People, Nazis are in this movie.
He was excited at the idea that his dad actually asked him to go see the movie with him. So that was, I thought, kind of nice. So once he gets his video situation sorted out, we'll get to that. But if anybody has nothing else left to say, because we're at 2 hours 41 minutes now.
No, as we've said before, and we'll say it again, Hitler made mistakes.
With this style, I could correct them all. A line he doesn't even say in the movie. And Tom, any parting words as a former archaeologist in your new digs there?
Yeah. I think Ernesto belongs in a museum.
Ernesto belongs. Okay.
Well, I'm aging like fine wine, so I might as well belong in the museum at this point.
Yeah. Until next time with Scotty, and if the three of us ever unite for a commentary show or something, which could be fun, I'm Kat. There's Ernesto. Tom. Right. I should probably give you guys a chance to shout out. Tom, what do you got going on your channel? Where can people find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on youtube.com/@Tom Jr. Jackson. You can find me doing some live streams and reviews and just, farting around, as the kids like to say.
Ernesto?
House. That's the only thing you need to know.
Yeah, okay. You can find me at Slice Night at Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, though I don't really check Twitter. And you can find me on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel on the Unifying Force show every second and fourth Sunday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific. And you can find me here in Fantasmagorium. We got a lot of playlists, fun videos, and stuff. And so until next time, everybody.
And you can find Kat tomorrow on the Burn Network at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific for Kat's Corner Live on the Burn Network.
That's right. Yeah, I'm going to show off more of my physical media collection. All right. So
there are children around.
Until next time, we will ride off into the sunset. Yeah, careful. We don't want to get demonetized by humming the tune.